Hey guys, welcome to the channel. So in today's video we are gonna see, what if Ash swapped minds after winning Alola League? Part 3. This story is the Mew Complex by Rylu. Before starting, if you are interested in Pokemon fanfictions, you can consider subscribing this channel and like this video, that will help a lot. Now let's dive in. Kukui ran. The clouds that earlier had been tucked in the far distance were now looming nearly on top of the paradise, and the wind was picking up, getting chillier by the minute. Kukui, ignoring the warning signs, sprinted across one of the bridges that went over the pools on the deck, and saw a glimpse of Ash as he rounded the last structures in front of the landed aircraft. "Ash!" Kukui called again, in a desperate attempt to stop the boy. "Hold on." Ash had already reached the aircraft, and stood there facing it, legs braced and Pikachu by his side. Kukui was nearly there when the aircraft door slid open, and a woman stepped out to the bridge and fixed her eyes on Ash. Kukui halted mid-step, still a little too far away to be any real help, and saw Ash's hands balling into fists. "Ash Ketchum," the woman announced, and her steady voice carried easily over the wind and the sound of the ocean below them. "We meet again." Ash was silent for a moment. Then, he shared a look with Pikachu, and went, "Really? Who are you?" The woman stepped onto the deck, pulling her long white coat tighter against the wind. Her hair was thick dark blue, weaved into a long braid behind her back. She was around Kukui's age, possibly a bit younger. Kukui didn't recognize her at all, and it seemed Ash didn't either. The woman smiled thinly. "Right. I was told you might not remember." She stepped closer, and even though she was seemingly alone and had no Pokemon by her side, Kukui could sense she was a dangerous individual. A powerful one. "My name is Miriam. We met a couple of years ago." Ash stood absolutely still under her steely gaze. "I don't remember." "You helped us create something that ended up nearly destroying us," Miriam told him. "Did, for a long while, until eventually it paid off." She smiled. "I should thank you for that, actually." Ash, shocked, took half a step back. "Helped you? You're a Pokemon hunter, aren't you? Why would I help you?" "Why?" Miriam hummed. "Well, everyone can be persuaded." Pikachu's cheeks sparkled, and suddenly Ash was so angry he was almost vibrating. "No, I wouldn't. I'd never help any hunters." Kukui, bracing himself, stepped towards him. "Ash." Miriam's gaze snapped to him in an instant. "I advise you to not get any closer, Professor," she warned. "This is between me and this brat." "I am his guardian," Kukui said, low and even. "Any business you have with him, you have with me." Ash turned to look at him, his eyes widening. "Professor Kukui, it's okay, I'll handle it." Miriam laughed, a sharp cut of sound. "His guardian? Does you guardian know how dangerous you are, Ash Ketchum?" Ash froze. Kukui felt himself bristle, and he stalked towards Miriam. "You're part of Team Enigma, right? What do you want from Ash? His Pokemon? To defeat him? Please, tell me." "Oh," Miriam said, her smile stretching. "You really care about him, don't you? Was it your idea to come up with that flimsy cover story of him leaving Alola? Too bad you did a shitty job with it." Kukui's eyes narrowed. "How long has Faba been working with you?" "Long enough. Apparently, he got fed up working for a group of preppy assholes like you. He found out there was good money involved in business such as ours. High risk, high reward." Before Kukui could reply, Ash spoke. "What did I do?" Both Kukui and Miriam fell silent, turning to look at him. "You said I did something for you," Ash continued. His voice was hollow. "That I helped you create something. What was it?" The look in Miriam's eyes was almost hungry as she gazed at him. Kukui felt his hand going to his belt, his body getting ready for a battle. "Want me to show you?" she purred. Kukui couldn't let this get any farther. He squared his shoulders, demanding attention. "You still didn't answer my question," he said loudly to Miriam. "Why are you here? Really?" Miriam threw her head back and laughed. "Isn't it obvious by now?" she mocked. "I'm here for him." She pointed one poorly manicured finger at Ash. "Not for his Pokemon, or for some meager revenge for what he did. Well, not entirely for those reasons. I need him, no matter how scrappy and destructive he can be." Her eyes flashed. "He can be pretty useful, too." Pikachu was in front of Ash in flash, tail pointed and whole body sparkling with electricity. Ash started forward, but stopped himself, his hand reaching towards his buddy. Pikachu. You two are so sweet, Miriam said. I see not much has changed. Ash raised his head and stared straight at her, and Kukui knew how intimidating his gaze could be. I don't care what you're trying to do, Ash told her, and I dunno what happened years ago, but there's no way I'm gonna help you this time. Miriam reached for something hanging on her belt. Then it's a good thing I'm not asking, she said. And suddenly a few things happened at once. Miriam raised a megaphone-like device and pointed it at Ash. Ash made a pained sound and staggered back, hands flying up to his head, and Pikachu leapt forward with electricity building up in its cheeks. Kukui yelled, starting towards Ash, but didn't get far before something surged down from the sky and snatched the boy and his Pikachu in its claws. It swept them up into the sky, and the air current it left behind made both Kukui and Miriam stumble back, struggling to keep their balance. And then as fast as it had happened, it was over. Kukui was left standing at the edge of the deck with Miriam in her aircraft, and veering in the air a distance away was Tobias on his Salamence, with Ash and Pikachu hanging from its paws. Ash! Kukui yelled after them, struck with the stagnant feeling that Tobias had just betrayed them. He could just about make out their diminishing forms as Salamence ascended, more and more and more, and then the Pokémon disappeared over the top of the ether building. Miriam growled, and Kukui turned to her. Maybe he was wrong. Miriam was positively boiling with rage, staring after the man. What the hell is he doing here? Tobias? Kukui asked, startled. Miriam whipped her head around in a flash. She raised the device again and pointed it at Kukui, and Kukui braced for pain. But nothing much happened, not like with Ash. Kukui felt a wave going through him, like a burst of air, and his ears started ringing. Stepping back from it, he grunted, What is that thing? Ah, too bad, Miriam scoffed, and put the device down. There was shouting coming from behind them. Kukui looked over and saw a bunch of ether guards running towards them. Professor Kukui. One of them shouted. Are you okay? What is going on here? She's the one behind this attack, Kukui explained. We can't let her get away, we need to stop her here. Understood, the guard said, and they each took out their Pokémon, cornering Miriam against the aircraft. Thank you, Kukui breather. I'm going after Ash, please, be careful. Miriam was baring her teeth, her frustration palpable. How annoying. Fine, I'll deal with you first. Guys, come out of there. Kukui was already sprinting away, but he could see a bunch of Enigma grunts exiting the aircraft, gathering around their boss. Kukui, heart in his throat, could only hope the guards would be all right. Kukui was rarely so desperate he'd put his Pokémoner himself on the line for it, but this time he didn't even hesitate to release Braviary as he was running towards the ether building. Braviary, he panted, and his beautiful bird flapped its wings, cooing in high pitch. Can you get me on top of the building? Braviary flew around him a couple of times, and Kukui spread his arms, too full of adrenaline to properly feel scared for what was about to happen. It had been years and years since Braviary last carried him. He'd been more of a teenager than a full-grown man back then. He briefly wondered if this was a good idea after all. And then Braviary swooped down, grabbed his upper arms and lifted him. Kukui yelled. He really couldn't help it, and he looked down where his legs were swinging under him, and his lab coat was flapping violently against his body. Oh my gods, he gasped. Oh my gods, fuck this. Braviary screeched, a magnificent sound, and its powerful wings took them higher and higher, until the deck was just a blurry mess under them and the ocean around them stretched in every direction. Just as the strain in his shoulders was getting to be a bit much, and Kukui's eyes were watering from pain and the wind hitting his face, Braviary had reached the height of the building's upper roof and started sliding towards it for landing. Kukui could see the shapes of Ash and Pikachu and Tobias on the corner of the roof, and he braced his feet and prayed for the best as Braviary got them nearer and nearer to the ground. Ash and Tobias were staring at him with expressions so surprised it would have been hilarious in any other situation. Fuck, slow down a bit, can you, Braviary? Kukui blabbered, and Braviary spread its wings and struggled against the wind and the additional weight, and finally Kukui was close enough that Braviary could release its claws and drop him onto the roof. Kukui's knees folded under him, and he rolled over his shoulder, probably way less gracefully than he imagined it looked like, and ended up lying on his back, gasping for air like he'd just run a marathon. "Professor Kukui!" Ash yelled, and soon the kid was leaning over him, looking down at him with wide brown eyes. "Wow, that was awesome. Are you okay?" Kukui coughed and pushed himself up to his elbows. I'm good." He was still shaking like a leaf and his hair was wildly blown out of its ponytail, and he must have looked like he was about to be sick. "Nice job, Braviary." Braviary landed next to him, breathing hard but proud of what it had managed to do, and Kukui returned it to its ball. "Oh my gods," Kukui said again, rolling onto his hands and knees. Ash reached his hand to help him up, but Kukui waved him off. He sat on his heels to try to fix his mess of a hair and smiled briefly up at Ash. "Thanks. Just give me a minute." Tobias had appeared behind Ash's shoulder and was gazing down at him with hooded eyes. "I have to say that was impressive," he commented. "The trust you and Braviary share must go deep." "All of Kukui's Pokemon are really strong," Ash told him excitedly. "Braviary is so cool." Tobias hummed. "I must agree." Kukui had finally calmed down enough to clamber up to his feet. He brushed his hands down his clothes and fixed his glasses onto his face, and then turned to face Tobias with a firm expression. He still didn't entirely trust Tobias, and he didn't like the way he'd just swooped down and taken Ash away right in front of him. So, he began. "Care to explain what just happened down there?" The look on Tobias's face didn't waver. "I did what I had to get Ash out of that situation before it went too far." He was speaking trough-gritted teeth, and Kukui could see him leaning against the roof's edge, favoring his left leg. A thin sheen of sweat covered his face, like he was in great pain. "And what happened to you?" Kukui asked despite himself. "To your leg?" Tobias chuckled grimly. "An attack down at the docks. Another group was trying to sneak in from there. I stopped them." Kukui nodded shortly, appreciative. Tobias had been guarding the place, and Kukui had to give that to him. He thought back to that device that Miriam had been holding, that small, odd device that had made Ash stumble and hold his head in apparent pain. "What was that thing?" Kukui asked then, and couldn't help but look at Ash, carefully examining him from head to toe. "That device that she used on Ash. It hurt him. It hurt you, didn't it, Ash?" Ash shrugged. "It felt weird, here." He pointed at his head. "It was sorta painful, but mostly just overwhelming." Tobias's eyes flashed. It was an aura emitter. A hunter tool for catching aura-wielding Pokemon. It causes any aura user immense confusion and discomfort. "Aura emitter?" Kukui and Ash repeated in unison. "Did you know?" Tobias asked Kukui. "About his aura?" He didn't need to specify who he was talking about, because Kukui definitely hadn't forgotten about that harrowing conversation he'd had with Ash just a couple of days earlier. When Ash told him what had happened at the Tree of Beginning, and how he'd tried to use the last of his aura to save Lucario's life. "Yes," he grit out. "I know. She must know too, then," Ash said. His tone was oddly flat. "I never tell anyone unless I really trust them, so I wonder what happened back then to make me tell her." Kukui's stomach made a painful flip. Tobias's mouth was a thin line, and he looked towards the direction of Miriam's ship. "She said she's after Ash," Kukui said, his volume raising with each word. "Not just his Pokemon, like you told us, but Ash." "I see," was all Tobias said for a moment. Kukui balled his fist to keep himself from yelling accusations at him. "Who are you? What aren't you telling us? Why are you even here?" and took a couple of deep breaths. Ash was holding Pikachu in his arms, telling something to it softly, and Pikachu had its paws curled in the folds of his shirt like it was never going to let go again. "Who is she?" Kukui asked. Tobias closed his eyes briefly before turning to face Kukui. "She's my twin sister," he said, "and it seems like she has finally gone completely off the rails." Then, Sinnoh. "I don't really get it," Ash said after they had been walking for a while. "How am I supposed to tell you where Mew is?" Dirk rolled his eyes and gave a slight shove to his and Lucario's backs, making them stumble. "I'll show you soon," he drawled. "Now shut up and walk." Ash shared a look with Lucario. Even though the Pokemon was also bound with the same odd metal band as Ash, thankfully it had recovered well after having the aura emitter pointed at it for so long. It was obviously tired, but full of stubborn rage and pride. It wouldn't give up that easily, and neither would Ash. After maybe 30 minutes of walking, Dirk told them to stop and rounded them to stand in front. "Right," he said. He pulled out something small and shiny from his pocket and stepped towards Ash. "Stay still." Ash tried to turn his neck to get a better look, but Dirk had bended over and started fiddling with something around his left wrist. "What is it?" Ash asked, twisting his arm as much as he could under the band. He could feel something light and cold moving around his wrist. Dirk stood up straight again and held up a metallic bracelet at eye level. "It's one of these. Looks like normal jewelry but contains a small button and a transmitter for your location. Once you find Mew, or you are certain of its location and know how to get there, press the button and we'll come for you." "And, are you then gonna sneak in? Or, attack them?" Ash asked, trying to piece together how this was going to work. Dirk gave him a warning look and nudged him to start walking again. "Never mind what we're gonna do. You just do your part, and afterwards, you might be allowed to see your precious friends again." Ash frowned but kept following him until they arrived at a tall brick wall that cut through the forest. Large gate doors stood in front of them, and at one side of them, a doorbell system. "You do remember the story, right?" Dirk asked, thumb hovering over the button. "Tell me." Now Ash wanted to roll his eyes. Dirk had gone over it a million times during their walk, so Ash could pretty easily reiterate it. "You're a Pokemon hunter specializing in Aura Pokemon. You spotted me and my Lucario practicing Aura moves, so you caught us, and you want to sell us to these guys 'cause you admire their work." "Good," Dirk said. "And who are you?" "I just started my Pokemon journey, and Lucario is the only Pokemon I got. I've had it since I was a child, so I'd do anything for it." "Exactly," Dirk said approvingly. "You'll define, now." He suddenly pushed Ash, so hard he lost his balance and fell to his knees. Since his arms were bound, he couldn't grab anything to steady himself, so he tumbled all the way down, onto his side on the dirt path. Lucario growled, and Ash rolled onto his back just to see Dirk kick the Pokemon in the stomach. Lucario went down, and Ash maneuvered back onto his knees to shout at the hunter. "What's your problem? What was that for?" But Dirk, instead of answering, reached out, grabbed his hair and twisted, and Ash bared his teeth at him as his eyes watered. Dirk pushed down and smashed Ash's face into the gravel, and Ash coughed into the road as little stones dug into his skin and forced their way into his mouth. "Carry!" Lucario snarled, more animalistic than Ash had ever heard it sound, and it charged Dirk at full speed and headbutted him into his stomach, and they both went flying down the road. "Lucario!" Ash shouted. "Don't he'll just hurt you." It was unfair. The metal bands that were around him and Lucario, Dirk had told them they suppressed aura, thus making both Ash and Lucario feel more sluggish than usual, and it was also apparent Lucario wasn't using any of its moves as it stomped down on Dirk. Dirk, instead, didn't care how unbalanced the fight was. Recovering from Lucario's tackle, he grabbed his favorite toy from his hip, the aura emitter, and pointed it straight into Lucario's face. The Pokemon dropped like a stone, and Dirk pushed himself up with a manic grin on his face. Meanwhile, Ash had managed to get back onto his feet, so Dirk stalked towards him, grabbed the front of his hoodie and shoved him against the brick wall. He was taller, and Ash had to balance on his tiptoes to not choke. "This is just to make it more believable," Dirk smirked, throttling him against the bricks. "Gotta make sure it doesn't look like you came willingly." He still had a black eye from the punches he'd taken from Ash earlier, when they had first captured him and the others. Ash had no doubts that really, this was payback for that, and for the earlier incident at the Pokemon Center. Dirk's grip let up a little bit, and the second Ash got his feet back under him he leaned his way downwards and showed his knee up between them, and well, even if he meant to hit Dirk in the stomach, he wasn't that sorry it ended up landing somewhere a little lower. "You bastard!" Dirk screamed in high pitch as he dropped down onto the gravel. "You're gonna fucking pay for that." Ash hopped away, kneeling beside Lucario. He nudged it with his arm, and it groaned, slowly coming back. "Can you get up?" Ash asked quietly. Lucario nodded. Ash helped it the best he could, and just as Lucario got its heels under itself, there was a look of pure fear on its face as it saw something behind Ash's shoulder, and Ash knew it was over. Something hard smashed into the back of his head and he went down, dust billowing as his shoulder dug into the gravel. Ash twisted around and saw Dirk, pale-faced and furious, advance upon him. "You little shit," Dirk howled, kicking him in the stomach. Ash curled around it, refusing to make a sound. You stupid idiot, don't you realize you just doomed your friends by doing that? Another kick, and Ash rolled around, breathless and smarting, rolled and rolled until he was far enough away to struggle back onto his knees. You still need me, don't ya? He yelled back. He felt something warm trickling down the back of his neck, and his face and stomach hurt terribly, but he still straightened his back and glared Dirk into the eyes. You still need me for your stupid plans, and you know I'm not gonna do anything for you if you hurt my friends. Dirk stopped, just short of reaching, and stared down at him, breathing heavily. He seemed to be in the middle of a mental battle with himself, probably whether he should continue to kick Ash's ass or stop. Eventually, he came to a decision. He reached down and pulled Ash to his feet by his collar, and then turned around on his heels and stormed to the doorbell. Fine, he growled. Fine, let's just do this then. Ash grimaced, bending over to catch his breath as the pain started to settle in, and Lucario came silently to stand by his side, shoulder to shoulder. The radio phone at the door crackled, and someone asked, "Who's there?" Pokemon Hunter DI called in advance. Right, hold on. There was a brief silence, and then, a Lucario and an aura-wielding kid? Dirk shot a dirty look towards Ash and Lucario. That's right, he replied. Please step away from the gate and wait for our agent to approach. Will do. He walked back to where Ash and Lucario stood. Ready? He snarked. Ash didn't bother to reply. He was still taking shallow breaths, holding his stomach and hoping nothing was too broken inside. Lucario growled, low and deep, and Dirk gave it a warning glance. I promise to keep this little scuffle between us, if you promise as well, he said to Ash, and wasn't that odd? Ash glanced at him from under his brow. So, I guess you weren't supposed to attack us. Dirk made a face at him. He looked almost amused. Holy shit, you really don't have any survival instincts, do you? Ash just shrugged, and Dirk turned away with a huff. It didn't take long after that until the gates started to shift open, and a tall woman stood in front of them. She had braided blue hair and a long, stylish coat, and she gave them a critical once-over. Hunter D? She asked, and the man nodded. And those are the aura users? Dirk agreed. Ash Harrison and his Lucario. Ash's name wasn't that well known in the trainer scene. Yet, Ash thought secretly. But Dirk had still insisted they'd use a fake name for him. Ash had suggested Harrison, Brock's last name, since it was easy to remember and made Ash feel a little bit more at ease. Thinking about Brock always did that for him. He's really young, the woman said, considering Ash. Her tone was cold, so it was clearly more of an observation than a concern for her. She must have seen the blood in his hair and the scrapes on his cheek, but she didn't comment anything about that. Big potential, though, Dirk said unctuously. An orphan, so no one's gonna be looking for him in a while. Little kid trainers like him go missing all the time, anyways. Little kid trainer, Ash thought a little hysterically, and wanted to laugh. Taking a breath, he kept his face neutral and head down. And you saw him using aura, not just his Pokemon? For sure, Dirk said, and I can prove it to you. The woman crossed her arms. Please do. You know what this is? Dirk asked, raising the aura emitter. Ash grimaced at the sight of it. His head hurt badly enough already. Obviously, the woman scoffed. Go on. Dirk grinned. Well, behold. He pressed the device right against Ash's temple and activated it. There was no way Ash could have faked his reaction to be any less than it was. His vision spun and a whine started at the back of his skull, and soon there was nothing else. His entire body filled with intense pressure, and he must have lost his balance at some point, choked out something nonsensical, because when he came to, Dirk was holding him, hoisting him up under his arms. Ash's skin tingled all over, his aura in full shock and bursting at the seams as the suppressing band around him made everything 10 times worse. Lightheaded, he struggled out of Dirk's hold, took a few steps, dropped to his knees and leaned into the bushes, dry heaving. There was nothing in his stomach so nothing came out, but he still couldn't stop shaking. He looked up when a shadow landed over his watering eyes. The woman was staring down at him, a stark look of curiosity on her face. You're strong, she said, sounding pleased. Ash could barely hear her through the ringing in his ears. Dirk smiled smugly and patted himself on the chest. That's what I told. I'll take them. And that was that. Ash was blindfolded and taken through winding corridors into a large office. Once the door was shut behind them, the woman, who had introduced herself as Miriam, took the blindfold off and sat him onto a plush chair. Ash sighed, melting into the soft cushions, and it took all his willpower not to pass out then and there. Lucario was instructed to sit on the floor on the other side of the room. Ash Harrison, Miriam announced. Meet Saga. She is the leader of Team Enigma, the organization which now owns you. On the far side of the room, looking frail behind a big wooden desk, sat an older woman. She had long, graying blue hair and a kindly yet serious face. Ash nodded at her, uttering a small hello. Miriam hissed through her teeth, making an incredulous face at him. I apologize for him, she said to Saga hurriedly, drawing her back very straight. He'll learn manners soon. I think you can see he's been through some ordeals today. Very well, I understand, Saga said haughtily. Her voice was thin and crackling, and she soon pulled out a napkin and started to cough into it. Miriam was by her side in an instant, soothing her as she rubbed her back gently. Easy, mother, she hushed. Ash took note of that. Mother and daughter, he could certainly see the relation between them. Saga raised her head and looked at Ash with some concern. You do know I don't like using children, she said disapprovingly. They tend to be troublesome. Miriam patted her shoulder and stepped back. The hunter wasn't lying, she told Saga. His aura is extremely powerful. That Lucario as well. We can use them to speed up Project M2 right away. The risk is worth it. Saga sighed, still gazing at Ash. What do you think, boy? Ash, startled, stammered, me? Miriam flicked him on the forehead. You address her as ma'am, is that clear? Ash's eyes widened. Yes. Ma'am. Answer her, Miriam snapped. Ash had no idea what to say. Really, he had nothing to say. His only goal was to endure this as long as it took to find Mew and save it and then his friends. I'm confused, I guess, he muttered and hurriedly tacked on, ma'am. Please excuse him, mother, Miriam said, tone miffed, he has a head wound. Ash almost burst into giggles at that. This situation was absurd. Saga shuffled through some papers on her desk, looking for something. She eventually found it and after reading for a moment, looked back over at Ash. Do you know how to use your aura? Ash shifted uncomfortably on the chair. He was still bound by his arms, and he throbbed all over, and his mouth was so dry it felt like it was filled with sandpaper. He thought about his aura. He had never really learned how to use it. He could, on instinct, and he could, if Lucario helped, but mostly it was random bursts, and feelings, and luck. Whatever these people wanted him to do with his aura, he probably couldn't deliver. But oh, well. That was a problem for future Ash. Right now, he was too tired for this conversation. Yes, ma'am, he said, and Saga's eyes lit up with a pleased glint. I suppose he'll do. As long as he can be of use during Project M2, she said regally. Well, at least the Lucario seems like an excellent catch. It has been very well behaved so far. Ash glanced at Lucario. It sat still on the floor, its back straight, but Ash was certain it was just as exhausted as he was. The Pokémon nodded at Saga as it was mentioned but showed no other emotion. Please, ma'am, Ash found himself saying, before he was fully aware what he was even about to ask for. Please don't separate me and Lucario. It's everything to me. Miriam glared at him. You are not in the position to make any demands. Ash shook his head. It throbbed, and his vision tunneled, but he fought through it. It's not a demand. Lucario's all I've got. I'm just asking if. He paused to catch his breath. From the corner of his eye, he could see Lucario looking at him intensely. A heavy pause, and then, treat them, and bring them to the labs, Saga ordered, taking pity on him. Her voice sounded distant to Ash, like it was coming trough a long tube. He closed his eyes, doubling over. Come on, kid, Miriam sighed, and grabbed him by the arm, manhandling him off the chair. Let's go. Ash probably answered, but he wasn't entirely sure. As Miriam dragged him away, Ash could only hope all this trouble had gotten him at least one step closer to Mew. No, Kukui said. No, wait. Let's start from the beginning. But Tobias was already looking over the edge of the roof, brow creased. We don't have much time, he warned. She's preparing to come after us. Kukui stalked towards him, hands clenched into fists. Miriam's your sister, he demanded. You just said your sister is the one coming after Ash? You really didn't think to admit this any earlier? Grimacing in pain, Tobias turned on his good leg to face him and raised one hand in front of him. I'd hoped it wouldn't come to this, he grunted. I haven't seen her in years, not since our mother died. But we really can't discuss this right. There was a flash in the corner of Kukui's eye, and when he looked over, he startled and almost stumbled back in shock as Miriam teleported near them with a Gardevoir at her side. Pikachu jumped from Ash's arms, standing tense and dangerous between her and its trainer. Miriam's eyes narrowed as she gazed at Ash, Kukui and Tobias. You really are only making this harder for yourselves. Tobias limped up next to Kukui. Why Ash? He asked. We know he has aura, but there are Pokemon way stronger than him who can use their aura better and more efficiently. You won't need a kid to do that for you. Miriam laughed, but it sounded off. I see you still don't know everything that happened back then, she said in a mocking tone. I've been following his career all these years while we were rebuilding everything from scratch. I've seen the things he's capable of. I've seen the way the world moves around him. Kukui felt frozen, while Ash worriedly asked, what's that even mean? Miriam grinned, all teeth. Why don't you ask him? And to Kukui's horror, she pointed straight at him. The professor, Ash said, blinking. Why? Why? Miriam repeated. I bet he's been watching you real close these past years. I bet he's been real interested in your collection of rare Pokemon and your innate ability to, I don't know, attract legendaries? Kukui could see Ash silently mouthing attract legendaries, eyes widening at the edges, and he stepped forwards with his hands raised. Stop right there, he snapped, anger rising. That's enough. We're putting an end to your operation, and this time for good. Miriam laughed, sharp and high, almost manic. Who's we, Professor? I only see you and my pathetic little brother over here. I'm not exactly scared. Hey, Ash exclaimed, before Kukui could get a word in. I'm here too. Kukui reached out and put a hand on his shoulder before he could stop himself. Ash, I think you should. Ash jumped back, eyes flashing, hand on his belt. No way. We went over this, right? I can fight. This is about me, isn't it? This isn't just any Pokemon battle, Kukui said desperately. They're here to kidnap you. Ash's brow furrowed, like he still didn't get it. I've been kidnapped before, and it was all fine afterwards. Miriam burst out laughing again, while Kukui and Tobias just stared at him speechless. Now I remember why I liked you, Miriam snickered. Pikachu's tail curled around Ash's calf. What did you mean? Ash shot back. About the legendaries. Miriam grinned. I can tell you all about it if you come with me. I believe we have a lot to talk about. She looked at the Gardevoir by her side, and Kukui jumped into action, throwing a Pokeball his own. Gardevoir, Incineroar, Throat Chop, Incineroar was on Gardevoir before it could execute the teleport. Miriam stumbled back in shock as Gardevoir was thrown across the rooftop, tumbling into the middle of the large skylight window that covered the conservatory area below. Now, blast burn! Kukui yelled, and Incineroar sent a scorching flame at the stunned psychic. Dodge it! Miriam screeched, but Gardevoir was too slow. It wailed as the blast burn hit it full on. Miriam ran across the glass towards the struggling Pokemon. Hold on, get us farther away. There was a flash as Miriam and Gardevoir disappeared and appeared all the way to the other side of the rooftop. Hey! Ash exclaimed and started sprinting toward them. Right then, the door to the rooftop opened, and a half a dozen of Miriam's grunts tumbled onto the roof. Boss! They shouted, we're here. Miriam was too far away for Kukui to see her expression, but her voice sounded annoyed as she yelled back, take care of those two, pointing at Kukui and Tobias. With pleasure. One of the grunts grinned, throwing his Pokeball. Stunky, use acid spray on that Incineroar. The rest of the grunts followed suit with their own Pokemon, completely cornering Kukui and Tobias. Dodge it! Kukui ordered. He glanced at Tobias, who had released his Darkrai and was preparing to battle despite still struggling to stand on his injured leg. Can you fight? He asked under his breath. Tobias nodded. He was pale, his mouth pressed into a thin line. Yes. The grunts were fully between them and Ash, who had already sprinted to the middle of the skylight, ordering his Pikachu to go against Miriam's Gardevoir. Kukui could only hope he could handle himself for the time being. Use Darkest Lariat, he commanded, moving his focus back to the battle at hand. Ice Beam, Darkrai, Tobias muttered, and together they began working their way through the grunts that surrounded them. They had nearly cleared their way when Kukui's attention was drawn by the battle going on farther down the rooftop. It was Ash's Pikachu and Lycanroc against Miriam's Gardevoir and Cresselia. But what had gotten Kukui's attention was the unmistakable glow of the Z-ring on Ash's wrist. "Maybe I broke the electric crystal the other day," Ash was shouting, "but I found this one just for you and me, Pikachu. Let's try this out." He had pressed the Pikachinium Z to the Z-ring and the energy was already flowing freely between him and his most trusted Pokémon. "What are you doing?" Miriam screamed. "What move is that?" Ash stood steadily, his feet apart and jaw set, and with the roaring ocean below him and the thunderous clouds above him, there was certain electricity in the air that was not just from the worsening weather. Kukui knew his bond with Pikachu had strengthened during the past couple of days, and besides, Ash had always been a swift learner when it came to Pokémon moves. His own battle completely forgotten, Kukui pushed past the equally stunned grunts and walked closer to observe the show of true power. "Let's go, Pikachu," Ash said, "with our full power." Pika. It was a sight to see. Incredible power, 10 million volt thunderbolt, and the stormy skies above only increased the effect. Miriam looked absolutely terrified as the attack built and built, as the sky opened above them, and Mewtwo, Miriam screamed, throwing yet another Pokeball, an Ultra Ball. Counter that. Kukui stumbled back in shock. Mewtwo? He had never seen. 10 million volt thunderbolt. "Let's go," Ash yelled, and the power surged forward. Mewtwo, the ultimate Pokémon, floated towards it, its palms raised and covered in swirling purple light, and as the unstoppable force met the immovable object, the result was an earth-shattering explosion. Well, Kukui thought numbly, as the glass skylight fractured below his feet. Earth-shattering was quite the perfect word for it. He caught a look from Ash, wide-eyed, seeming more perplexed rather than horrified, before the glass finally caved in with an ear-piercing crash, and he, along with Ash, Miriam and their Pokémon, were falling straight into the conservatory down below. Then, Sinnoh the medic was swift and efficient, but not that gentle. She made quick work of Ash's face, disinfectant still stinging on his skin as she slapped a band-aid over his cheekbone, and then moved on to comb through his dirty, tangled hair. "Oh, my," she tutted, as her thin comb barely made it through the tufts of matted hair. "You have such thick hair. You should take better care of it." "I usually do," Ash muttered. It almost felt nice. Ash closed his eyes and enjoyed the feeling of someone taking care of him, if even just for a moment. It felt like a lifetime ago when Bernat last brushed his hair, buried her hand in it and ruffled it just like his mom liked to do when he'd been smaller. The medic soon found the wound in there, just a shallow cut, nothing to worry about, and squirted disinfectant there too. She wiped most of it away, taking the trail of blood with it, and patted him on the shoulder. "Well done, that's the worst of it done," she said kindly, as if she'd expected him to flinch or squirm or complain. "Now, look over here for me." Amenably, Ash stared into the middle distance as she shone a penlight into each of his eyes. "Any nausea or dizziness?" she asked. Ash shook his head. "Not anymore." "Try to follow my finger with your eyes." Ash did, to the best of his ability. The medic seemed satisfied. "He's fine," she told Miriam. "A tough one, this. Just let him get a proper good night's sleep in before his first mission." "What about his arm?" Miriam asked, and the medic checked his forearm. "Just scrapes," and then under the fraying gauze wrapped around his shoulder and upper arm. She looked surprised, seeing the mostly healed puncture wounds, but Ash didn't explain, and she didn't ask. She applied something that felt cold and soothing against his skin and wrapped it back up with clean gauze. "Come see me tomorrow," the medic instructed. "I'll check how these are healing up." Ash almost didn't know how to deal with this stranger being so kind to him, deep in this odd, dangerous place. "Oh, okay," he said, surprised. "Thanks." To Miriam, the medic snapped, "Now, get some food in this boy. He's about to fall over." I'm fine, Ash said, unconvincingly, and Miriam pursed her lips, unconvinced. We're in a bit of a hurry, but sure. Let's take a detour to the cafeteria. She had unlocked the band from around his body for the checkup and didn't put it back as she led Ash away from the med bay. Ash rolled his shoulders as they walked. He was feeling much better now that his arms were free, and he didn't feel so beaten up anymore. His aura, too, had settled into a steady hum, curing the worst of his headache right away. Despite his earlier pleas, Lucario had been taken to a different room away from Ash, and no matter how much he'd asked they wouldn't tell him where it was. But the visit to the medic had taken a while, so he decided to try again. So, what about Lucario? He asked cautiously. Don't worry, we got it fully healed, Miriam said. It needs to be at full strength for the next part. Ash didn't like the sound of that, but he bit on his lip and kept walking. At the end of the hall, Miriam led him in ahead of her into an empty cafeteria, and Ash waited at a table as she picked up a couple of sandwiches and a bottled juice. With a reluctant sort of intent, she dropped the provisions in front of Ash and sat down opposite of him. She glared away from him, towards the doorway, while Ash unwrapped the food and dug in with enthusiasm. A leathery beef sandwich had never tasted as good. Once Ash was done eating, Miriam told him to follow, and they started down another hallway. So, Ash began, when their silence stretched, and his curiosity finally got the best of him. What do you need me and Lucario for? Miriam gave him a sideways glance. You'll see soon. Ash was starting to get really annoyed about not getting any straight answers. These people treated him like nothing but a pawn in their games, and that wouldn't do. He was also playing to win. So, he prodded, what's that project about? That M2? Miriam stopped in her tracks and turned around to face him. Her expression was tight, unreadable. Ash quickly shut his mouth and stood to attention. You are a strange one, Ash Harrison, she said after a moment. She sounded intrigued, like she was trying to figure out an interesting puzzle. Ash swallowed. Strange. I can't quite figure you out, Miriam said. I wonder if you really are who you say you are. How come? Miriam huffed. You fit the description of a beginner trainer perfectly well, but there's something about you that seems, I don't know, experienced. Ash slouched his shoulders a bit, tried to look more nervous. He had probably been getting too bold. I dunno really what you mean, he replied warily. Sorry if I asked the wrong thing or anything, I got curious. But I'm really just gonna do what you tell me to do cause I don't want to get me or Lucario hurt. You have a strong aura, Miriam continued, ignoring him. Exceptionally so. You probably could take me out with it right now if you wanted to. But you wouldn't, right? She smiled, sharp as a knife's edge, because we have your Lucario. Ash recoiled, suddenly on edge, hands balling into fists at his sides. What's that supposed to mean? You are terrified, Miriam said, watching him like an interesting specimen in a terrarium. But not for yourself. You're terrified for your Pokémon. Ash stared at her. Of course I'm worried for Lucario. What's that got to do with anything? Oh, a lot, actually, Miriam replied, something dangerous in her voice. Almost anyone in your position would prioritize their own survival, especially over a mere Pokémon. A kid like you should be crying and begging for their freedom they just had brutally taken away. And, she lashed her hand through the air, showing him the empty corridor they were in. Your aura clearly is strong enough, and your mind is clear enough to attack me in this deserted hall, but you haven't. Why? What is your goal? She advanced on Ash, and Ash stepped back, away and away from her until his back hit a wall. Miriam leaned over him and snarled, Why are you really here? Agitated, Ash raised his hands in front of him, ready to push her away if necessary. I already told you, didn't I? He shouted. Lucario's all I've got. If I don't save it, then it doesn't even matter if I get out or not. It was surprisingly easy to lie. Ash couldn't think of a scenario where you would rather run away than help his friend who was in trouble, so sticking with the cover story felt natural. Hearing how Miriam spoke about Pokémon, how lowly she clearly thought of them and their worth, well, it pissed him off. It majorly pissed him off. Miriam surged, grabbing both his shoulders and pressing him against the wall. I don't believe you, you brat. Ash felt his aura flare up. Before he could accidentally hurt Miriam, he gritted his teeth and dropped down, throwing himself to the side and half ran, half crawled down the hall to get away from her. He stopped a few paces away, both hands extended straight in front of him. Miriam was facing him in a similar position, face set in furious lines and an aura emitter trained at him but not activated. Wait, stop, Ash panted, heart racing. Stop, okay? Who are you? Miriam demanded. Answer me. What are you gonna do with Lucario? Ash yelled back. Whatever it is, let me help. I've got aura too, so let me take its place. If this Project M2 is. He chalked to a stop. He stared at Miriam, eyes widening as realization hit him. He felt his face paling, and his legs went numb under him, and he was suddenly frozen. M2. He repeated in a whisper. Mewtwo. You're gonna create a Mewtwo. Miriam regarded him coldly, but her hand holding the weapon wavered. What do you know about Mewtwo? Ash was breathing hard. When? He asked. When are you gonna create it? It's already happening, Miriam said, and Ash's arms dropped, hanging slack by his sides. It's already been going on for 2 days. No, Ash choked out. Why? It wasn't really a question, but Miriam answered him anyway. Isn't it obvious? She scoffed, and it was. Ash squeezed his eyes shut. It was always the same with people like her. It was always about the power and the money and the control. It was always the same, and no matter how hard Ash fought against any of them, there was always another to take over. 2 days. It had been going on for 2 days. Would it be too late to stop it already? And what's Lucario got to do with it? Ash asked quietly. Miriam eyed him incredulously. Oh, what the hell? She huffed then. You said you'd be willing to take its place. Well, it might just work. If you really want to see it, then follow me. She turned on her heel and started walking away. Ash stared after her a moment before sprinting to catch up, though he stayed a half a step behind her. What do you mean? He demanded. Where is it? Normally, it takes a long time to create a fully formed Mewtwo, Miriam said, and Ash struggled to keep up with the change of topic. According to the research made by our scientists, the last and only previous Mewtwo was held in a growth tank for years until it was strong and mature enough to break into the world by itself. That Mewtwo ended up destroying the entire lab with its uncontrollable fury. Giovanni's Mewtwo, Ash muttered half to himself. Miriam glanced at him sideways. So you know, then. It's a difficult process and has been attempted numerous times since, unsuccessfully. There aren't many who know cloning techniques well enough to even have a decent chance. But, she smirked and lifted her chin, we figured it out. And it's not going to take years, this time. I think we can finish it today. Ash nearly stumbled over his feet in his shock. Today? Miriam nodded. When you think about it, it's not that complicated. A Mewtwo is a clone of Mew, but it's also something different. It's one of the strongest Pokemon imaginable, so what would we need to speed up the creation of one? She paused, and for a second or two Ash could only hear his own thunderous heartbeat. Miriam continued, well, a lot of energy. A lot of that certain natural, innate power that all Pokemon hold, though some more than others. She grabbed Ash's arm, pulling him to a stop. They stood in front of a doorway, and she pushed through, taking Ash with her. Maybe you figured it out already, she said, as Ash took in everything he was seeing in front of him. The wires and the lab equipment and the several huge tanks that filled the room. And Lucario, hanging suspended in thick liquid in one of the tanks, connected to another tank that held inside it a nearly fully formed Mewtwo. Lucario! Ash exclaimed, ignoring Miriam and the several scientists that were working in the lab minding the tanks and the wires, and sprinted across to lean against the glass. Lucario. It didn't move, floating there limply, its eyes half closed. Ash's rapid breath fogged against the glass. It can't hear you, Miriam said, appearing behind his shoulder. Ash jumped back, fists raised in front of him. You see, your Lucario is donating its tremendous aura for a greater purpose. For the creation of the most magnificent Pokemon of all, Mewtwo. And no, Ash rasped, and the louder, no, stop, it's gonna die if you continue, use mine. You said you could use mine instead. He spread his arms, desperate, leaning against Lucario's tank. Please, you said you could. Calm down, Miriam snapped, and Ash bared his teeth at her. I'll keep my word. I can take your life force instead, if you're so desperate to get rid of it. Ash glared after her as she stepped away to talk to one of the scientists. The lab-coated man glanced at him in clear shock but didn't object Miriam's orders. Prepare the secondary donor tank for a change of subject, she told them, and while the staff started working on removing Lucario, Ash took the moment to look around more. There was another tank behind the one that held Lucario, and there was something small floating in it. Something tiny and delicate, with a long tail that nearly reached the bottom of the tank. Mew. Mew, he whispered. Quietly, he walked up to the tank. Mew was pale and unmoving, almost translucent in its exhaustion. Its eyes were closed, and its paws loosely curled over its chest. It looked nearly dead. Ash turned, furious now, to stare at Miriam. "What about Mew?" he yelled. "What's happening to Mew?" Miriam's expression was cold. Mew is the main donor. Its DNA matches almost perfectly to Mewtwo's, and so does its aura, and it has a lot of it. That's how we've managed to get a nearly fully formed Mewtwo in just 2 days. Now, we just need the last push, the last bits of energy, and you may be just what we need to achieve success today. "You're hurting it," Ash shouted, too desperate to care anymore about any kind of caution. "Can't you see it's almost dead?" "That was a sacrifice we were willing to make," Miriam said bluntly. "But hopefully, with your and Lucario's contribution we can manage save its life." They didn't care if they killed Mew, Ash realized. They only cared about creating Mewtwo as fast as possible. He felt sick. Realizing he only had minutes left to act, he fumbled for the bracelet around his wrist and pressed the button there. An odd sense of relief filled him. It was done. No matter what was about to happen next, at least it might put an end to this inhumane experiment. The lab team had lifted Lucario out of the tank and were laying it down onto the tiled floor. It was limp and unconscious, only the barest movement of its chest telling Ash it wasn't completely gone yet. Ash set his jaw and stood up straight. "Hurry up then," he said, and his voice was even, most certainly sounding stronger than he felt in that moment. "Hurry up and put me in there. Before it's too late for Mew," he finished in his head. Miriam scoffed, but the curious look didn't leave her eyes as she instructed the scientists to prepare him for submersion. Determined not to waver, Ash stood perfectly still as they fitted him with an IV and a breathing mask, and then made him walk up the scaffolding that led to the top of the tank. "In you go," the lab-coated man said, and Ash only hesitated for the briefest second before scooting over the edge and dropping down into the depths. Flow PMH. It was an odd feeling. As the viscous liquid filled his ears, all the outside sounds got suddenly muffled. He felt heavy and light all over, felt like floating and under immense pressure at the same time. Eyes tightly shut, he held his breath until he no longer could, and it felt almost wrong to draw in a full breath while completely submerged. Slowly, he opened his eyes too. Everything was distorted and colored pale yellow. The liquid stung his eyes at first until he forced himself to adjust, and then he could see the hazy forms of Miriam and the scientists moving around behind the glass walls of his tank. His own assisted breathing roared in his ears like the waves of a thundering ocean. Time lost all meaning. Something cold trickled through the IV below his elbow, and Ash found himself fading. Fading and fading until there was no longer lab around him, no longer a sting in his eyes or the pressure of the mask around his face. Until he was no longer. "Who are you?" Ash opened his eyes to a different world. He was floating, flying, and the sun was bright above him. He wasn't alone. "How did you get here?" Ash looked around. He was with Mew and Mewtwo, and the 2 Pokémon were watching him carefully. The sun didn't give away any warmth, and the colors of the nature around him were slightly wrong, like in a child's coloring book. Ash realized he didn't need to breathe. "My name's Ash," he said, and his voice sounded floaty and hollow. The 2 Pokémon startled a little, backing away. "Why are you here?" Ash shrugged. "I wanted to help." Mew and Mewtwo floated a little closer. Mew reached its paw toward him and touched his face gently. Ash could feel a shiver go down his spine, all the way to the tips of his toes. "You are weakening, human." Mewtwo was watching him closely. Ash could feel its strength in his bones, its overwhelming aura and the immense psychic powers it held. It was getting harder to focus. Why would you put yourself through this for a mere clone? Ash fought against the exhaustion and the confusion that was taking over, fought to stay for a moment longer. "There's nothing wrong with being a clone," he forced out. His eyes rolled, and he stared at the imaginary sun to keep himself awake. "There's nothing wrong with you, Mewtwo." He closed his eyes. "Mewtwo?" Ash nodded. And what is my purpose? Ash had no more words. His fingers were numb, and his body curled inwards against his will, and he knew he was nearly gone. As long as Mew and Mewtwo would live, it would be okay. Yeah, it would be. Crass SHHH. All the tanks in the lab exploded, and Ash came back to awareness as he hit the floor, soaked and covered in glass shards, and a fully formed Mewtwo standing right above him. Afterwards, Kukui couldn't recall much of the fall or the moments surrounding it. He remembered that horrifying, bottomless feeling in his stomach for a few seconds before smashing through a thick tree. He remembered desperately grasping to hold onto the branches, alerting a flock of Nadu that then soared out of their resting place wildly cawing, and then plunging straight into the warm pool of water that thankfully covered large parts of the conservatory floor. Dazedly, he dragged himself to the nearest shore and just laid there, halfway out of the water, coughing weakly and trying to determine if he was still in one piece. He was, if just barely. Face pressed into the grass, he focused on getting some air into his lungs, taking shallow, rasping breaths. Professor Kukui. Someone called, and suddenly there were hands all over him, pulling him completely out of the pool, patting his face and chest and checking his airways. Kukui squinted towards the familiar voice. He muttered feebly, okay. Curling onto his side, he coughed out a handful of pond water before drawing in a ragged breath and opening his eyes fully. Champion Lance and Officer Nanu were kneeling over him, shock and concern stark on their faces. What happened? Lance demanded, once he had determined Kukui wasn't actively dying. The skylight broke. Why were you up there? Kukui grimaced, pushing himself up to a sitting position. We were looking for you, Lance added. The guards said they last saw you going towards the conservatory, but we didn't think you'd be on top of it. Kukui rubbed his hands against his face, trying to clear his throbbing head. We were there, because. Then, like struck by lightning, he remembered, Ash. He whipped his head around, frantically trying to get a glimpse of his student that had fallen along with him. Scrambling against the grass, he tried to stand up. I need to find. Calm down, Professor, Nanu ordered, pushing down onto his shoulder. Kukui easily went down with him. He wasn't very happy to notice he was too weak to resist even that simple force. Let's start from the beginning. No, you need to listen to me. Kukui waved his hand around desperately. Ash was up there too. He fell and Miriam, she had a Mewtwo. She's going after Ash with a Mewtwo. Miriam? Nanu asked. She's the leader, right? Where is Ash? Kukui? Lance asked, worry lining his words now more than ever. Kukui shrugged miserably, pushing strands of wet hair from his face. I don't know. Alive, I hope. Lance and Nanu gave Kukui a short recap while he recovered. They had both arrived around the same time, just moments ago. Lance by Tobias's invitation and Nanu by Kukui's. And since they didn't know where else to start looking, they had made their way to the conservatory floor. Right as the ceiling above them cracked and rained down like a shower of millions of brilliant, gleaming, deadly shards of glass. We didn't get a glimpse of anyone else falling besides you, Lance told him. You landed basically at our feet. You look pretty banged up, Professor, but luckily, I don't think you managed to break or pierce anything vital. Thanks, Kukui grunted, finally feeling steady enough to get back onto his feet. He smarted everywhere, his back feeling especially strained, but it was something he could easily enough ignore for the time being. Let's look for Ash. But quietly, Nanu said in low voice. If he and that hunter are still recovering, or possibly unconscious, from that fall, maybe we have a chance to move him out of here to safety before she can have another go at him. Kukui agreed. The conservatory was quiet besides the sounds of the Pokemon living there. Many of them had gotten upset by the sudden crash, not to mention by the shards of glass that now covered every surface, so there was a bit more hustle and bustle going on than was perhaps ordinary. But still, there was no indication, not yet, that Miriam might be up and looking for Ash. Worryingly, though, there was no indication that Ash might be up yet either. Slowly, they made their way around the edge of the conservatory. Every once in a while, Kukui had to stop to brace himself against the wall, catch his breath and push down his bouts of pain. He really was feeling quite roughed up from the fall. He was sure Lance and Nanu were getting anxious and probably wanted to leave him behind and move along quicker, but they stayed patient for Kukui's sake. They knew how just much Ash meant for him. There was simply no way Kukui would stop now. "Tell us more about that Mewtwo," Lance whispered, as they crouched behind a thick bush to observe one of the corners of the conservatory. Was it completely under her control? Kukui made a face, rubbing his bruised shoulder absent-mindedly. "I'm not sure. I only saw a glimpse of it before the explosion. She had it in an Ultra Ball though. I never would have thought that was the best option for a Mewtwo." "It's probably a modified Poke Ball," Lance muttered. He seemed irritated about even the thought of it. It has been the topic of discussion for ages, about what is the best way to capture and hold a Mewtwo. Team Enigma's lot in particular was in favor of the Ultra Ball modification route. "I'm not happy to hear they went with that." He frowned, deep in thought. "It certainly can't be comfortable for the Pokémon. But I suppose there must be other ways she is keeping it loyal to her besides that. And none of those are good ones." "You knew she had a Mewtwo in her possession?" Kukui asked, a bit sharper than he intended. "You knew how dangerous she was. For how long?" Lance grimaced. "It's complicated. There was an event a few years back, where a Mewtwo was created. But what happened to it afterwards remained a mystery. No one could find it, nor the person who had created it, so for the longest time we weren't sure if they had escaped together or if Mewtwo had disposed of its creator and fled on its own." Kukui groaned, frustrated. "So you just let them, go? You let Miriam rebuild her organization in peace?" "Of course not," Lance sighed. "We just had nowhere concrete to start looking. My memories from that day are nearly non-existent. Same for everyone else involved. It wasn't until recently when Tobias contacted me with some worrying news, that I even remember he'd been there too. Or that Ash had been involved at all." "There is a theory that Mewtwo possess the ability to wipe people's memories," Nanu said. "I imagine it's no coincidence that there's major confusion surrounding its creation." "That's our running theory as well," Lance agreed. "Thankfully Tobias has recently been able to recall some essential bits and pieces from that time and got us back on track. But even with that, we were almost too late." Kukui felt terrible about accusing him. "I didn't realize. I'm sorry, Lance," he said. "I'm just worried about your kid," Lance finished sharply. "Trust me, I get it. Ash is very dear to me too. It's been an intense couple of days, figuring all of this out and making all sorts of plans to proceed." Suddenly, Nanu held his hand up to silence them. "Hush," he hissed. "I think I saw something." Kukui peeked through the bushes as well, heart in his throat. "Ash?" "Unfortunately, no, I assume that's the infamous Miriam. She appears to be talking to someone." And indeed, through the undergrowth and other landscaping, Kukui could see the form of the hunter staring up at something that was out of their view, her mouth moving rapidly. Agitated, Kukui straightened his back. "Let's go." "Hold it," Nanu ordered, grabbing his sleeve and pulling him back down. "You are in no state to battle, Professor. Let us do the heavy lifting this time, all right?" Kukui grumbled but nodded then. "Right. Lead the way." They rushed towards the area where they had spotted Miriam. It took a while for them to navigate through the ponds and trees and other obstacles, but finally they got a clear view of her. Kukui noticed she hadn't made it out of the crash unharmed, either. Her hair was sticking wildly out of her braid, her clothes ripped and covered in mud. She was facing Mewtwo with a furious, white-lipped look. Mewtwo hovered next to her, its expression cold and emotionless, its body nearly motionless. Kukui couldn't help but stare at the Pokémon. He'd never seen such a strange-looking creature. The unnaturalness of it was only amplified by the intricate armored collar that surrounded Mewtwo's neck and shoulders, making it look more like a machine built for battle than a living, breathing Pokémon. The collar looked heavy and cruel, and made Kukui feel sick to his stomach. "Where is the kid?" Miriam hissed at Mewtwo. "I won't ask again." "He's close." Kukui's eyes widened in shock. Mewtwo's voice was ocean deep and ageless, echoing through his whole being like nothing he'd ever experienced before. Miriam only got angrier. "You know more than that. You know exactly where he is. Why are you resisting my command?" "Somehow, I feel connected to that child. I do not wish to harm him." Kukui, Nanu and Lance shared a stunned look. Miriam, looking wild, took out Mewtwo's strange Pokeball and held it up between them. "I don't care what you want. And you know what's gonna happen if you refuse to obey me." Mewtwo simply looked at her blankly, but Kukui could swear its shoulders got tenser under the collar, like it was anticipating pain. I do know, Master. Then take me to that brat, now. Hey, Miriam. There was someone else approaching. The ferns surrounding the clearing rustled, and a small figure appeared out into the open. Leaves and mud in his hair, and a Pikachu on his shoulder. I'm right here, Ash said firmly, so leave Mewtwo alone. Then, Sinnoh Ash laid there, limp on the floor, as the world descended into chaos around him. Miriam was barking orders at the lab staff, and they were all rushing around and yelling things Ash couldn't make sense of. Lights had turned off during the explosion, though some sort of a backup generator was running, machines humming and dots of colored lights blinking everywhere. Most of the light in the room was coming from Mewtwo, who was hovering inches off the ground in the middle of the room, emitting a pale purple glow in every direction. Ash, gritting his teeth in concentration, shifted his hand across the floor, glass shards making a soft clinking sound around him. His fingers were coated in slimy liquid, and he curled them experimentally. The breathing mask was still pressing over his nose and mouth, and he pulled it off along with the IV needle from the inside of his elbow. Droplets of blood trickled down his arm, but he hardly felt it. He had never felt so weak. He knew he'd almost lost everything in that tank. Mewtwo, Miriam bellowed, and Ash wanted to warn her, wanted to stop her from escalating the situation any further, but he had barely any air in his lungs. Mewtwo, I am your master. Submit to me. Mewtwo's voice sent a shockwave through Ash's whole being. What have you done, human? Ash craned his neck and watched as Mewtwo rose higher and higher, and in its arms, it held a small, unconscious creature. Mew. Ash shifted, trembling and panting, until he had his elbow under him. Mewtwo, he gasped, and it was small and barely audible, but he knew the Pokémon could hear him. Leave. Run. Please, just run away. Mewtwo's glowing eyes were trained at him. There was no emotion there, other than distaste. Why should I forgive you people for causing this? Stay out of this, brat, Miriam snarled, palming a Pokeball in her hand. She looked like she was ready for a battle. A thump of a door smashing open came from behind them. There was someone, a grunt, at the lab doorway. Ma'am, he nervously addressed Miriam. We are under attack. Miriam laughed, sharp and cruel. Behind her, Mewtwo loomed. Oh, really? From a rivaling hunter crew, the man added, sweat pooling at his hairline. We think it's Pokemon Hunter J's lot. They have breached the central hall. Ash's heart leapt. Hunter J and Dirk. They were coming for Mew. What? Miriam screamed. Now. The man shifted, agitated. Why yes, ma'am. Saga is handling it upstairs, but we might need backup. Well, you better go back up there and help them, Miriam snarled through her teeth. I'm busy right now if you can't tell. Yes, ma'am. The man saluted sloppily, hastily, before running away again. I'm sorry, Miriam said to Mewtwo once the man had gone. Let's continue. What was the purpose of my creation? Ash shivered, unable to focus on the interaction any longer and dropping down onto his back, breathing hard. His arms and legs were tingling, feeling slowly returning to them, and he managed to roll around onto his stomach. His eyes caught something blue and familiar in the corner of the room, and he set his jaw, got his elbows under him and crawled towards it. Lucario, he whispered. Ash. Lucario was awake, slumped slightly against the wall but not completely out of it. It reached towards Ash, and once they were close enough to each other, it grasped his head between its palms and pushed their foreheads together. I was worried, it murmured, holding him tightly. I saw you in that tank, Ash. Are you all right? When I was in there, I felt like I was slowly dying. I'm all right. Lucario, Ash sighed, closing his eyes briefly. It felt good to be held by it. I am glad. Ash got his knees under him, suddenly feeling stronger, and that was when realized Lucario was sharing its aura with him, donating him bits of something he'd almost lost completely, and Ash panicked. Wait, he yelped, grabbing both Lucario's hands and pushing them away from his face. Don't give me too much. Lucario was weak, too. It had also been drained. I have plenty left, Lucario assured. I wasn't there for long. Not as long as you were. It's too risky, Ash argued. Breath caught in his throat, and he let go of Lucario completely, shuffling back until they were no longer touching. I'm gonna get better. Don't worry about me. When this is over, I'm gonna recover on my own. You feel hazy, Lucario said, and it frowned deeply. They took too much. You will only keep weakening unless I help you. Ash shook his head. Even after all these years, the way Lucario had faded into nothingness while saving Mew was still clear in his mind. I can't risk it, he said, soft and terrified. Mewtwo's voice broke through his consciousness once again. You created me for slavery? It was speaking to Miriam. The lab staff had fled, and the hunter stood there alone, facing Mewtwo on her own. There was one Pokémon at her side, but Ash couldn't quite make out what it was. Her other hand was palming something small and blue behind her back, maybe a Pokeball. No, you misunderstood, she exclaimed. You wouldn't be my slave, you'd be my partner. Partner? Together, we'd be unstoppable, Miriam continued, a manic glint in her eyes. I could show you what you're really capable of. Ash waved his hand at Lucario, silently asking it to follow, and started crawling towards the exit. His sticky palms and knees dug into the shards on the floor, but he ignored the sharp stings of pain and kept going, all his blurry focus trained on the path ahead. Let me help you, Lucario offered, but Ash batted its reaching hand away. I can manage, he forced out between huffs of strained breath. They reached the doorway and slipped through it. The corridor was empty, so Ash took a moment to rest and leaned against the wall, grimacing hard. His vision was swimming. He really just wanted to lay down and sleep. He really needed to sleep, but he wasn't sure whether he would wake up again if he did. Suddenly, something slipped through the doorway after them. It floated closer, gentle and feather-light, and landed on Ash's lap. Mew! Ash whispered in awe. The Pokémon meowed softly. One of its paws curled around Ash's fingers, and the other one reached for Lucario, and between one breath and the next, it blinked them out of existence. They reappeared outside of the building and landed onto a heap on the front lawn. The ground was sloped, and Ash found himself rolling down a hill, the world hurtling by him in a flurry of lights and color. Finally, he ended up onto his back, lightheaded and stunned. Ash! Someone yelled. Ash stared up into the sky. It was sunset, he noticed. A beautiful, cloudless evening. Ash! A voice shouted in his ear, and then there were arms all over him, shaking and prodding. Ash, are you okay? Absent-mindedly, Ash nodded. Yeah. Oh, my gods. Look, he's all slimy. What happened? That was May. Ash felt a smile stretching across his face. That was May. May? He whispered, and she appeared above him, wide eyes gazing down at him. Oh, Ash. She breathed, and then someone else took over, someone with bigger, rougher hands. I got him, May. Go, let's regroup at the truck. Right. May's soft hands left his face, and Ash instantly missed the contact. Are you injured? Brock's voice asked. Can I move you? Ash shook his head and then nodded, and then forced himself to focus. I'm okay. Just tired. Tobias. Brock shouted. Help me move, Ash. Tobias. Ash wondered. If Tobias was there, then Max must have been safe too, and that meant. Pikachu? He rasped, frantic suddenly, grasping Brock by the sleeve. Brock took his hand in his, rubbing warmth into his fingers. Pikachu's fine. All your Pokémon are waiting with Kellen and Nurse Joy a bit farther back. They're all okay. Ash slumped back down. Oh, that's good, yeah, Brock said, and didn't let go of his hand. Take it easy now. Another person appeared over him, his tall form dark against the evening sky. How is he? Tobias asked, crouching down next to Brock. Exhausted, Brock said. I don't know much else than that. Let's move him away from the building. Tobias took his legs and Brock grabbed him under his arms, and they heaved him into the air. Ash craned his head around trying to get an idea of what was going on, but it was quite dark and there were people and Pokémon running around everywhere, yelling various things. What's happening? He muttered. Where are Mew and Lucario? Mew and Lucario? Brock asked blankly, and alarm bells started ringing in Ash's head. They were with me just minutes ago, Ash exclaimed, twisting around in Brock's hold, making him yelp. They're really hurt too. I gotta find them. Hey. Brock huffed, tightening his grasp. We gotta go back, Ash said frantically, flailing around a bit. Let me go back. Ash. Brock snapped. We can't go back. This is battle zone between Team Enigma, the G-Men and Hunter J's gang. We need to get away from here as quickly as possible. That made Ash shut up. Battle zone? He repeated, tone hollow. The G-Men have raided this place to take down Team Enigma for good. Additionally, as you know, Hunter J's gang is here as well for the Mew. It's utter chaos right now. But, Tobias said and grunted, hoisting him up a little. We can tell you more details later. I'll go look for Mew and Lucario once you're out of the way. Ash finally went limp in their arms. He stared up to the sky. They created Mewtwo, he told them quietly. Both Brock and Tobias stumbled, nearly dropping him. What? Tobias rasped. During these 2 days. Yuha, Ash said, gaze vacant. I helped them do it. Where is it now? Brock asked with concern. Ash, where did Mewtwo go? I dunno, Ash muttered. He could still feel the weight of its glare against his skin. It was pretty mad at us. Tobias and Brock kept their pace up, but they were both silent for a while. Ash knew they were communicating over him without words. I'll take him the rest of the way, Brock said then. Tobias, go find Lance and warn him and the others about this as fast as you can. Ash let them maneuver him onto Brock's back. He draped his arms around Brock's shoulders and Brock supported his legs, and then they were off again. This is bad, Brock said to him sharply, the last Mewtwo we met. I know, Ash muttered, squeezing his eyes shut. I'm sorry, it was too late to stop it. Brock bounced him gently. Hey, whatever happened, it wasn't your. He suddenly yelled, startled, throwing himself to the side. A wall of fire whooshed past them, just inches away, and Brock went stumbling down onto the grass. He groaned in pain as his knees took the brunt of the impact, but he held tightly onto Ash and managed to keep him on his back. Ash whipped his head around in shock and saw a familiar figure advance towards them with a Heatran at his side. Oh, here you are, Dirk chuckled. Found you, Ash. Brock struggled back to his feet, turning so his body was between Ash and the hunter. What do you want? He snapped in a low voice, and Ash had almost never heard him sound so mad. Give it up already, can't you see it's over already? I don't think so, Dirk smirked. Heatran, use Magma Storm. Brock was moving before Ash could even think to react. He threw out a Pokeball, yelling. Water Gun, Mudkip. The two attacks collided, and Brock hobbled back, away from the impact zone. You okay? He asked over his shoulder, and Ash nodded. Mudkip, Brock began, but then there was another person next to them, taking control of the situation. You two, get back, Officer Jenny ordered, stepping towards Dirk. This one works for Pokemon Hunter J, one of the most notorious hunters in Sinnoh. I'm going to take him down right now. Officer Jenny. Dirk yelped. First the G-Men and now the cops are here too. What the hell is going on? We alerted everyone, Brock said evenly. After you kidnapped our friends, and after we heard about Hunter J's plan to infiltrate Enigma headquarters and capture Mew back, we knew it would be the perfect chance to kill two birds with one stone, so to say. Today is going to mark the end of both your and Team Enigma's operations, Officer Jenny announced, and her Growlithe barked sternly as if to vouch her words. Dirk looked around in bewilderment. Boss, could I get some help here? Brock adjusted Ash on his back, tensing a little as a Salamence landed on the grass behind Dirk. It was Hunter J, and she looked completely done with the situation. Dirk, she called from the top of her Pokemon. I suppose this is the end of our deal. Dirk turned on his heels, staring up at his boss. The end of B-Boss, what do you mean? Hunter J rolled her eyes. I was always prepared to get out the minute you turned out to be more trouble than you're worth. Goodbye. But, Dirk stammered, utterly dumbstruck. Ash could not believe this was the same man who had attacked him just this morning. He looked so pathetic that Ash almost felt bad for him. Hey, wait. Officer Jenny yelped, but the Salamence was already in the air, speeding away and taking Hunter J with it. Boss. Dirk screamed. No, Jay. Wait. You better go now, Officer Jenny said to Ash and Brock. I'll handle the rest of this. She turned back to face the horrified Hunter. Right. Dirk, was it? Let's see what you're made of. Brock thanked her quickly and started jogging away. We're almost there, he said to Ash. We've got clean clothes and food for you. You're gonna be okay." They could hear Dirk's defeated wails fade into the background as they got farther and farther away from him. Too exhausted to really feel any joy about his downfall, Ash buried his face into the crook of Brock's neck and hoped that he was right. Lance had to throw his arm in front of Kukui's chest to stop him from sprinting right in the middle of it. Miriam turned her full attention to Ash, her back straightening in excitement. "There you are." Kukui's heart hurt looking at Ash. He was pale as a sheet, bloodied scratches all over his arms and clothes dripping wet. But the look on his face was thunderous, jaw set and eyes aflame. Ash spread his arms protectively, yelling at Miriam, "Leave Mewtwo and the Pokémon living here alone. They've done nothing wrong." "Then stop resisting already, if you truly want me to leave them be," Miriam snapped back. "You're only making this harder for everyone involved." She was squeezing Mewtwo's Pokeball tightly in her grip, fingers white-tipped. Mewtwo stayed completely still, like frozen in time, gazing at Ash with unreadable eyes. "Why do you try to get me to come with you?" Ash asked bluntly. "Is it about the stuff you were saying about the legendaries?" "Well, it's true, isn't it?" Miriam said manically. "You have discovered a way to contact them, to lure them to your presence." Ash took a faltering step back, looking dumbfounded. "Lure them? No, Ash!" Lance shouted sharply. Both Miriam and Ash turned around, finally noticing them at the edge of the clearing. Ash's eyes widened. Champion Lance." For a second, he looked almost too stunned to continue speaking. Then, he looked past the other two men and his eyes met with Kukui's, and his face opened. "Professor Kukui, are you okay?" "I'm all right, Ash," Kukui replied firmly. He turned to the hunter. "Miriam," he growled. "Enough of this nonsense. Can't you see this has already gone too far? You're never going to recover from this mess." Miriam scoffed. "Nothing's impossible when you have Mewtwo at your side. That's something you lot are about to learn the hard way." "You have no idea what kind of forces you're dealing with right now," Lance warned. "Not just the police of multiple regions, but the G-Men, Pokémon Rangers and Island Kahunas of Alola as well. It's over, Miriam." Looking past Miriam, Kukui could see that Ash had leaned over to whisper something to Pikachu while she was distracted. Pikachu was nodding, deep concern mixed with pure determination in its eyes. Ash looked like he was barely staying upright, his trembling hands braced against his knees and skin paled down to an unhealthy pallor. But his eyes were bright and his gaze steady as he pointed a finger at Miriam, whispering Pikachu his plans. Suddenly, Kukui got an awful feeling about what was about to happen, adrenaline rushing through his body making him lightheaded. He reached out and grabbed Nanu's shoulder desperately. "Nanu," he choked out, when Nanu turned his frown at him. "We need to stop Ash, he's about to." "What?" Nanu snapped. "I don't know," Kukui babbled. "I just know it's something risky, look." Ash had straightened his back again. Kukui didn't know where he got the strength from, but he looked steady again, hands fisted, and feet planted into the ground like he was preparing to withstand the force of a hurricane head-on. "Quick attack, Pikachu," he ordered, and Pikachu was off like a bolt of lightning, zooming across the clearing and being all over Miriam before she was able to even fully turn around. "Get it off, Mewtwo!" Miriam screamed as Pikachu ran lightning-quick circles around her feet, making dust and dirt billow all around her, forming a thick cloud that covered her from head to toe. Mewtwo looked hesitant for a moment, the visibility around her so bad it must have been worried it would harm its master if it tried to attack Pikachu. "Now, Iron Tail," Ash shouted, "just like we planned." Pikachu leapt up, smacking its tail at Miriam, who screeched in pain. Mewtwo's eyes started glowing and it raised one of its hands. A pulse of purple light shot out and hit Pikachu, sending it flying across the clearing until it smacked into the far trees. Pikachu yelped once, and when it hit the ground it stayed down, completely unmoving. Horrified, Kukui could only watch as Ash's face hardened even further, eyes darkening under his tangled tufts of hair. Miriam was fuming with blind anger. "You obnoxious brat. What the hell was that? Did you really think?" She held her right hand with her left, protectively pressing it against her chest. It looked like it was broken. It must have taken the brunt of Pikachu's iron tail. She pointed at Ash with her good hand. "You really thought that did something?" But Ash was hardly listening to her. He had fallen to his hands and knees, crawling across the clearing like he was looking for something. Breathing hard and thin, shaking hands patting down the grass below him, he moved forward with single-minded focus. "We need to do something," Nanu muttered, "now that she's distracted." It was a dangerous idea. Miriam's full attention was on Ash, and she was furious. One wrong move and she would direct her anger at someone. Most likely Ash. With the full force of the legendary Mewtwo by her side. "One last chance, brat," Miriam seethed. And then suddenly, she had her eyes turned at Kukui, Lance and Nanu. That manic glint now directed at them. Kukui felt a sense of imminent danger settling over them. Miriam grinned madly. "Give up and come with me, or I'll order Mewtwo to blast your precious professor and his buddies into million tiny little pieces. I'll give you 5 seconds to decide." Following her cue, Mewtwo turned on its place and faced Kukui and the others. It started glowing, its energy rapidly building into a thick bubble around it. Miriam counted, 3, 2, 1. Ash pushed up to his knees. His eyes were sharp, mouth a thin line. He held something in his palms as he struggled all the way back to his feet. "Destroy them, Mewtwo." With a final glance at Kukui, Ash sprinted the last few meters that separated him from the line of sight between Mewtwo and its targets. Kukui's heart dropped, horror filling him from head to toe. He didn't even hear himself scream. "No." Ash skidded to a stop, his back to Kukui, facing Mewtwo, and took the massive blast straight to his chest. Then, Sinnoh, it didn't take long for Brock and Ash to reach the front gates. The doors were lodged open. Brock walked straight out of the property, and past the gates. On the road were multiple parked trucks and motorcycles. Brock threaded through them until he stopped by a one with an open back, and without further ado he turned and eased Ash to sit on the edge of the hold. Max, he said, while Ash struggled with basic balance and tipped straight over onto his back with a huff. "I got Ash. Where's the change of clothes for him?" "Just a second," May's voice said, and Ash looked up just as Max leaned over him in wonder. "Ash," he yelled happily, crouching by him, "you made it." Ash grinned up at him. "Max." May was standing behind Max, with a towel and a bundle of clothes in her arms. "Don't touch him, Max," she warned. "He's covered in that weird stuff. Here." She dropped the towel onto Ash, who grabbed greedily onto the soft material with his sticky, freezing fingers. "Thanks," he said earnestly. He pushed himself into a sitting position and began toweling off most of the remaining goo from his skin, hair and clothes. "And here are the clothes. They're your own spare change from your backpack," May said, giving him the bundle. She turned away politely while Ash changed into familiar, fresh jeans and a hoodie. He felt vaguely bad for ruining Abigail's borrowed clothes so completely, but he also had an inkling she wouldn't care all that much. "Oh, and," Brock started, rummaging around one of the backpacks that were stored in the truck. "Something I forgot to give back to you at the Pokemon Center." He straightened his back and presented Ash's long-lost cap in his hand. "Tada." Ash's eyes widened. He grabbed the hat and turned it around in his hands. He'd assumed it had flown off while he was hanging outside the aircraft or something. "Oh, wow. I thought I lost it forever. Where did you find it?" "Luckily, it dropped while Hunter J's aircraft was taking off inside the tree," Brock told him. "I knew you would be looking for it later, so I grabbed it." Smiling gratefully, Ash put it on. "Thanks, guys," Ash said, feeling much more like himself already. He looked down at his hands. His skin was scratched and bruised from the various tumbles he'd taken. Tiny cuts littering his forearms and his trusty old fingerless gloves almost worn through. His skin was deathly pale, almost translucent. He remembered what Lucario had said to him after the tank. "You feel hazy. They took too much." Ash knew it was bad. He gnawed on his lip, feeling his friend's eyes on him. "What happened to you?" It was May. She crouched down next to him, taking his hand on hers. She squeezed his fingers carefully. "You're shaking." Ash knew he was. He shrugged, thinking about Lucario attempting to donate its aura to him. He wondered if it was okay, if Tobias had found it amidst the chaos of the battlefield. "Just need some rest," Ash said, still not looking up. "You see, they were using Lucario's and Mew's aura to create a Mewtwo." It was. He breathed in shakily. "The process was gonna kill Mew and then maybe Lucario. So I." He shrugged again, and Brock hummed softly. "You offered your aura for it too, didn't you?" Ash nodded at the floor. So now there's another Mewtwo. And it's gonna suffer, 'cause of what we did. Brock gave him a heavy look. Doesn't sound to me like there was much you could have done to stop it. Just as Ash raised his head to look at him, there was a yell and the sound of running steps, and then... Pikapi. Ash was tackled to the floor by something small and yellow and sparking. He let out a startled laugh, breathless, relieved. Finally. Pikachu. Pikachu crawled all over him, nudging his neck and face and licking side of his ear, before backing off with a disgusted look in its eyes. Blah. It complained, wiping its tongue with its paw as it tasted the residue goo on his skin. Ash just laughed harder. Sorry, buddy. I know it's gross. Pikachu, it flopped down to lay on his chest, content to just be close to him. Ash wrapped his arms around it and looked up to greet the newcomers. Hi Abby, hi Kellen, he said, grinning lopsidedly. He did a double take seeing the third person, and Kid, hey. Kid Summers laughed. Hello to you too. Lance asked me to come help with the cleanup, so here I am. Ash, thank the gods, Abigail gasped, hopping into the truck to kneel next to him. I'm so glad you're okay. Gave us a good scare. Kellen groused. We followed Latius into that warehouse but only found Max and Tobias there. Wasn't a great moment. Max said they took you and Lucario to Team Enigma, that you were supposed to help them get Mew back, somehow. Abby murmured, brushing her fingers along his arm lightly. Lance was beside himself when he heard that. Yeah. Max said in a small voice, it was kinda scary when you didn't come back anymore. Well, I mean, we got out, Ash hurried to say, looking at Pikachu. But I'm worried about Lucario and Mew. I lost them back there. Tobias is looking for them right now, Brock told Abigail and Kellen. He said to Ash, I'm sure they're fine. And you'd be right, someone said behind them. Well, at least about Lucario. Turning around in a hurry, they saw Tobias approaching with Lucario and his Darkrai following close behind. Lucario, Ash gasped, rolling onto his hand and knees. Hey, Ash, Pikapi. Are you alright? Ash asked Lucario, ignoring Pikachu and Abigail's protests as he crawled towards it and Tobias. Ash. Lucario greeted, rushing the rest of the distance to reach for Ash. It grabbed his hands and, it flinched, eyes widening as it looked at him in concern. Ash, you are, Ash smiled tightly and retracted his hands, pulling away from Lucario. Glad you're okay, he said quickly. Found it hiding near the front entrance, Tobias said. Apparently Mew disappeared after it had teleported Ash and Lucario away from the lab. No one has seen it, or Mewtwo, for that matter, since. Did you find Lance? Brock asked. Tobias nodded. Yes. The situation is mostly under control. They're wrapping up the operation soon. Oh, and, he leveled a look at Ash. Pokemon Hunter D has been arrested as well. Thought you'd want to know. Ash leaned against the truck wall, feeling slightly woozy. Yeah, we saw him earlier. Officer Jenny must have gotten him. His last sentence came out in a jumble of barely pronounced words. Abigail frowned at him. You're so pale, Ash. Are you gonna be alright? Lucario hopped into the truck. He needs attention immediately, it said curtly. Let me assist him. No, Ash snapped, and there must have been something stark in his voice because Lucario froze, and everyone around them turned to look at Ash in shock. Ash grimaced, pushing himself tighter against the wall. His voice was weak when he added, stay back. Pikachu hopped onto his lap, looking unsure if it needed to defend him from something or not, and Brock's voice got soft as he sighed, Ash. I'll be fine, Ash muttered, and felt a bit like he was trying to convince himself as much as the others. Something caught his eye, and he squinted into the darkness. There was someone walking down the road towards them. Were you looking for Mew? Ash knew that voice, Miriam. He jolted, scooping Pikachu tightly in his arms. Watch out, guys. He yelped, and Tobias, Kid and Kellen instantly moved to stand by the end of the truck, positioning themselves between the approaching hunter and the rest of their group. Who are you? Kellen demanded, and Miriam laughed. She pointed past him, straight at Ash. Someone who has unfinished business with that brat. Kid squared her shoulders, her hand moving to her belt of pokeballs. Don't step any closer. What did you say about Mew? Tobias asked in a low tone. Miriam's grin stretched. Hello to you too, brother. It's been a while. Brother? Kellen repeated incredulously, while Tobias's expression got darker. Miriam. Ash couldn't help but stare between them. Your brother and sister? But that means. Yes. Tobias said through his teeth. Saga is our mother. Enigma is a family business. That's why it has been so difficult to get out of it. Ah, yes. Toby really is the black sheep of our family, Miriam chuckled. Always complaining, always going against our mother's wishes. And you, instead, couldn't wait to grow up fast enough to go to capture missions with them, Tobias spat. Always excited when they brought home a catch in prime condition, begging mother to give you the best ones. Miriam laughed. Like anyone knowing their worth would. Not like you who wanted the broken and defective ones that were about to be eliminated because no one would buy them. I still remember you crying when they told you couldn't save them all. She mimicked a child's voice in a mocking way. But mommy. I know that Latias is half blind. But I still want it. Please don't kill it, mommy. Tobias's eyes darkened. You know Latias has lived a good life with me. All of them have. Even Darkrai was seriously ill when I got it, and it's now the strongest of my team. You're right, I've got to give it to you, Miriam retorted. You've always had a knack of dealing with the difficult ones. Her voice lowered into a snarl. Too bad you decided to betray us. Sure. And I shouldn't have waited this long with that, Tobias said bluntly. Seeing how you almost just killed Mew. Miriam suddenly looked pissed off. Mew this, Mew that. What is it with your obsession with that damn Pokemon? That Mew is extremely important for the region it came from. Kid said seriously. If it were to die, hundreds, if not thousands of people and Pokemon would suffer. And why would I care? Miriam snorted. It came from Kanto, anyway, so it has nothing to do with Sinnoh. My region is going to be fine. Kanto can perish for all I care. That hit Ash somewhere deep, and he had to bite his lip not to start arguing with her. There was something more important he had to do. He'd seen something behind Miriam, and he'd need to get there, quickly and without getting noticed, while she was too busy one-upping her brother. Silently, he slid towards the edge of the truck and shook his head at May and Abigail as they reached for him in concern. Pikachu crawled along with him, sensing his plan. Brock must have noticed it too, because he stepped forward, effectively blocking him from the view of Miriam. I heard the G-men have already captured Saga and most of her men, he told her, clearly attempting to rile her up. Doesn't sound that good for you or for the future of Team Enigma. Miriam bared her teeth at him. It's not over yet. That's why I'm here, to finish off some loose ends. Ash had dropped onto the gravel and was crawling on his hands and knees around the group, arms trembling and sweat building on his forehead from the exertion. Pikachu kept glancing at him in worry, but Ash kept his eyes firmly trained ahead and kept going. There was a small ball hovering inches off the ground, and Ash knew it was a capturing device. He'd seen something similar used on Pikachu by Team Rocket more times than he could count. And he had a pretty good idea which Pokemon was held inside it. And what would those be? Kellen asked, eyes narrowing threateningly. Miriam drew up to her full height. That damn kid who... She glanced past Brock, into the truck, and choked to a stop when he noticed Ash was missing. Her eyes widened in alarm. Where? Ash had reached the capture ball, and tugged it into his arms, bracing it against his body. Pikachu, use Iron Tail. He croaked, and Pikachu readied the attack just as Miriam yelled, no. Pikachu. Stop that. The ball in Ash's arms shook and cracked, and Mew burst out, weakened but furious. Cresselia, use Psycho Cut. Miriam threw a Pokeball and a beautiful legendary burst out, already aiming at Ash and Pikachu. Ash sat blinking on the ground, too sluggish to think of anything to do, but Pikachu was ready. Cheeks sparkling, it jumped in front of the powerful attack and countered with Thunderbolt. It wasn't quite strong enough, and the psychic move cut through it and slammed into Pikachu. Pika. It yelped in pain as it flew back, and Ash caught it before it could hit the ground. Cresselia was fresh and immensely powerful, and they were too close to each other for a fair fight, and Ash knew from experience this could only end one way. Cresselia, use Moonblast. Ash wrapped his arms tightly around struggling Pikachu and turned over, bracing to take the attack himself. He squeezed his eyes shut but realized after a few seconds that the move never connected. Heart racing, He looked around and saw they were held inside a protective bubble of glowing energy. Lucario! Ash gasped, and Lucario glanced at him from where it was standing over them, arms raised to shield them with its aura. I cannot hold this for long, it warned. We need to get away from her. Outside of the bubble, there was fighting. Ash could barely see Miriam's Cresselia going against Tobias's Darkrai, and the shape of Brock running towards him and Lucario. Ash! He shouted, and it sounded muffled trough the rumble of the aura that surrounded them. Ash, are you okay? Ash got up to his knees just as Lucario let out a breath and stumbled, shield dropping. It fell back, and Ash reached to brace it against his body. The noise of the battle hit them with a slam and Brock was suddenly leaning over him, hands reaching to check him over. I'm fine, Ash said, and his voice sounded distant to his ears. Pikachu jumped away from his hold and snapped something scathing at him. Ash grimaced, batting away Brock's searching hands, but Lucario and... He looked around and saw Mew slumped on the ground behind him, barely able to keep its upper body off the ground. It mewed softly and then flinched as Cresselia's attack was barely blocked by a Beedrill Kellen must have just caught with his capture styler. How do we get out of here? Brock muttered to Ash, looking around worriedly. I can carry you, but someone needs to take Lucario and Mew, too. I can help, Kid said from behind him. She stepped forward and bent over to tug Lucario up and against her side. Brock grabbed Ash's hands and pulled him up, and Ash swayed and leaned hard against him to stay on his feet. Pikachu crawled under Mew and lifted it onto its back, and together their ragtag group shuffled back towards the truck. If we can just get back to the truck and get it moving, Brock said under his breath. Ash, Brock. Max yelped, and suddenly he and May were running towards them. Their eyes were wide and scared, lit up by the flashing lights of the aggressive battle going on near them. What's going on? Brock started towards them, horrified. No, guys, stay back. Squeezed against his side, Ash could only watch as Miriam released her Gardevoir and had it use dazzling gleam towards them. A powerful light built around Gardevoir and then it charged, straight at the unprotected May and Max. May screamed, throwing herself in front of Max, but someone was even faster. Mew leapt off Pikachu's back and stretched its tiny body wide, and a bubble of energy formed around the kids, their Pokémon, Brock and Kid. Ash blinked, once, twice, and the third time he looked around they were no longer in the forest. Now, ALOLA the following moments were a blur. Lots of yelling, lots of running around, both Lance and Nanu throwing out their Pokémon. Multiples of them, advancing on Miriam with a thunderous fury they only reserved for their worst enemies. Kukui falling down to his knees next to Ash's limp form, numb fingers patting down his barely moving chest, pulling his head and shoulders onto his lap, brushing his messy hair away from his eyes. Ash, he muttered, voice hoarse from screaming. Please. No, please, Ash. As Kukui moved him, Ash's bent arm slid down from his chest and straightened against the grass, his palm opening, and broken pieces of a pokeball fell away from his limp fingers. Kukui stared at the singed pieces of blue material, struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. What it was that Ash had literally put his life on the line for. Before he could fully make sense of it, a large form loomed over them, landing softly and silently onto the grass on the other side of Ash. Kukui raised his head in blind anger, ready to yell or punch or even bite at anything that might still want to hurt Ash. Arms tightening protectively around the thin shoulders that laid on his lap. Mewtwo. It gazed down at Ash, its expression unreadable. There was no longer a collar around its neck, and it looked softer somehow, serious, but gentle. He freed me. Kukui's took a sharp breath. A shiver went down his spine at its voice. He stared up at it. Why? Kukui could hardly speak through the lump in his throat. That's just who Ash is, he whispered. Mewtwo reached down to where Ash's hand laid, picking up a piece of its own broken pokeball between its fingers. He sacrificed his life for my freedom. Dread filled Kukui's heart. His life? Mewtwo nodded. That blast was meant to kill. It was how my master intended. She's no longer your master, Kukui forced out. He didn't bother trying to wipe away his tears before they fell. He had to make sure Ash was still breathing under his hands. And he was. Thin and rattling, but still breathing. He wasn't dead. He jumped in front of that beam fully aware of the decision he had made. Mewtwo tilted its head as it bent over Ash's still form. Kukui held his breath. It was during that final second before my attack was upon him when I realized it. I saw how he held my prison in his hands, how the only thing he clearly wanted was to destroy it and set me free from my shackles. That was when I realized why I felt such a strange connection to him. Why? Kukui whispered. Mewtwo pressed its hand against its chest. There's a part of him in me. A part of him he had donated willingly to me years ago, before I even took my first breath. I knew I couldn't let him die. So, it was during that final second when I was able to stop the attack from hitting him fully. Mewtwo straightened, raising to float slightly above the ground once again. He shall live. Kukui dropped his head, tears flowing freely now. Thank you. He breathed out. Thank you. Mewtwo said nothing more. It glanced towards where Lance and Nanu had Miriam pressed against the ground, thick shackles going around her wrists, and without sparing her another glance, it continued to another direction, leaving Kukui alone with Ash again. Kukui wiped dirt and blood away from Ash's forehead. He seemed fragile, as small and pale as he was in that moment, though Kukui knew he was anything but. Not a single other person would go to the lengths to protect others like Ash would. He was insanely reckless, insanely stupid, insanely brave and selfless. And Kukui had never loved him more. Mewtwo returned after a minute. It was carrying Pikachu, the little mouse half awake in its grasp, weakly struggling to reach towards Ash. Mewtwo laid it gently onto Ash's chest, and Pikachu burrowed into it, whining softly into the crook of Ash's neck. I thank you, Ash Ketchum. And Kukui held them, steady and strong for the both of them for a change, until the medics finally rushed the scene and made him let them go. Give him time, Nurse Joy said as she left the room. It'll take a while for him to gain his energy back. Kukui just nodded numbly. They had Ash laid down on one of the beds in Ether's hospital wing, tucked between soft blankets and lush pillows and Pikachu's sleeping form. Besides a slight fever, he had been nearly fully healed by Nurse Joy's Blissey, and, as Kukui suspected, helped along by Mewtwo itself. Now, it was just a waiting game of when he would eventually wake up. Kukui had been healed up too, though unfortunately no amount of healing power could make him forget the horrifying minutes he'd gone through inside the conservatory area. That final flash of light had been permanently burned into his retinas, and every time he closed his eyes, that scene would play again and again on the inside of his eyelids. He knew those memories would be haunting him for the years to come. Kukui picked up one of Ash's hands into his. His skin was warm and dry, no longer unhealthily pale or covered in mud and dirt and blood. There were multiple scars littering his arm though, light and faded and clearly healed up a long time ago. It was obvious he'd not always been able to get medical help as swiftly and comprehensively as he had this time. He'd been out there for years, saving others by any means necessary. Over the years, Ash had told Kukui about the many incredible travels and encounters he'd experienced. Multiple people from Ash's life had called him special and unique, and even firsthand Kukui had seen Ash do impossible things. But still, it was only now settling into his heart what all of that truly meant. Kukui was never going to have him all to himself. Ash was on this earth to make it a better place for everyone. Rest up, kiddo, he murmured to Ash. I'll be here when you wake up. It took a couple of more hours for Ash to start stirring from his sleep. Kukui stayed mostly by his side, other than briefly going to see Burnett and the students to show them that he was all right. Lance had taken most of the responsibility on himself to explain what had been going on to the rest of the group, while Tobias recovered from his leg injury. Nanu had retreated with the prisoners to call backup for transporting Miriam, Faba, and the rest of the gang as far away from the paradise as possible, as soon as possible. Hey, Professor, Ash mumbled, startling Kukui from his thoughts. He focused back on Ash, smiling in a way he hoped was reassuring. Ash was looking up at him sleepily, only a slight feverish shine in his eyes. Hey, Ash. How are you feeling? Ash rubbed at his eyes, squinting briefly at the ceiling. Pretty good, I guess. What? His eyes moved around in thought, a slight frown forming on his face. What happened? Did Mewtwo get away? Kukui grabbed his hand, brushing his thumb over his knuckles. Yes, it did, and it was very grateful. Ash nodded to himself. Well, good. Kukui sighed. He didn't have the heart to scold Ash for his reckless actions, not this time, but he had to make sure Ash knew how much he'd scared him. I know you didn't see another way in the moment, but that could have gone so terribly wrong, Ash. For a second, I thought we'd lost you. Ash shrugged slightly. I wasn't sure if destroying that strange Pokeball would release Mewtwo, but I had to try it. I don't think Pokeballs can be very easily destroyed, but if anyone could do it, it would be Mewtwo, right? Kukui suppressed a grimace. So it wasn't a heat-of-the-moment thing. No, Ash had planned from the beginning to run in front of Mewtwo's most powerful attack. He'd seen Miriam holding the Pokeball and ordered Pikachu to rush Miriam and slam it away from her grip so he could get it instead, fully intending to use himself as bait to try to have it destroyed in that way. What a crazy, crazy kid. I don't get how you come up with plans like that, but it certainly did the trick. He huffed, both impressed and exasperated. Mewtwo realized you had good intentions, so it was able to save your life. It left soon after, taking most of the Pokémon from the conservatory with it. Those that wanted to go along with it to start a new life. Mewtwo told me it had been a captive ever since it was created, forced to obey Miriam. But now, it's finally free, thanks to you. Ash grinned, though he still seemed exhausted. That's good. And, how's everyone else? Tobias will be okay, right? And you thought the roof too, Professor. And how was Champion Lance here? Kukui held up his hand to calm him down. Everyone's fine. Tobias is already back on his feet, as my Lance is here to help, since he knew some of what had happened with Miriam in the past. He and Nanu are handling everything to do with that from now on. Nanu? Ash asked. Kukui blinked stupidly, before remembering that this Ash wouldn't know anything about Kahuna Nanu. He chuckled softly. Nanu is an island kahuna and a police officer on Ula Ula Island. I called him in earlier to help with the fight against Miriam and her goons. Cool, Ash said. Glad everyone's okay. Me too, said Kukui softly. Ash gnawed on his lip for a moment. I was wondering. Yes? Do you know a lot about Mewtwo, Professor? Kukui couldn't help the surprised breath he took. Mewtwo? He asked hoarsely. No, not that much. They're clones of Mew, incredibly powerful, and experts think there are less than a handful of them ever created. Ash looked thoughtful. That was the second Mewtwo I've met. Kukui tried not to stare. The second? When did you? It was when I was traveling with Misty and Brock, Ash explained. Someone was trying to capture Mewtwo, so we helped it to get away. Kukui remembered how this Mewtwo had seemed to know Ash from somewhere. There's a part of him in me, it had said. A part of him he had donated willingly to me years ago, before I even took my first breath. Miriam's Mewtwo knew you, Kukui told Ash. Do you think it could have been the same one? Ash looked up at him, startled. It knew me? No, this wasn't the same one. Their voices were different. I see, Kukui said, his brow creasing. Then they must have met during whatever was happening to his Ash in the past. What had Ash donated to Mewtwo? And why? Do you think it'll be okay? Ash asked suddenly. Mewtwo, I mean. Kukui smiled. I think so. There's plenty of space on Alola for it to settle down. Or it could travel even farther. Maybe there's an uninhabited island close by that it can claim as its new home. I hope so, Ash muttered. The door to the hospital room opened, and Burnett stepped in quietly. Is he? She whispered to Kukui, before noticing that Ash's eyes were open. She hurried across the room. Ash. Leaning over his bed, she brushed hair away from his forehead, leaving her hand there briefly to check for fever. Thank the gods you're all right. You scared us so badly. Sorry, Professor Burnett, Ash grumbled, so unserious and childish that it made something warm and happy spread inside Kukui's chest. He's still a bit hot, she said to Kukui, who nodded. Nurse Joy said that it's normal. His body went through a big shock and is still recovering, even though physically he's fine. I guess it's lucky we were here at Ether, Burnett said, so help was close by. That's true. And how are the other kids? Kukui asked her, taking her hand in his. Still doing all right. Burnett laughed shortly. Yeah, they're fine. But I contacted their parents and told them briefly about what had happened, and that wasn't fun. She noticed Kukui's incredulous look, and hurried to add, not anything about Ash or time travel or anything specific about the situation. Just that there was an attack on Ether by Pokemon hunters, so we are ending the school trip short and traveling back tomorrow. Right, Kukui said. Good. Perhaps we can go ahead and start the summer holidays a bit early this year. Bernard grinned. I'd like that. She turned to look at Ash. You'd like it too, wouldn't you, Ash? But Ash looked distracted. What? He muttered. Abruptly, his eyes widened in alarm, and he went white, like he was about to be sick. Kukui's grip on his hand tightened on instinct and he leaned closer, concern flaring up. Ash. Bernard jumped up. I'll get Nurse Joy, she said briskly and hurried off. Kukui stayed, frozen in place. Ash stared up at him with a strange look on his face, but Kukui wasn't sure he was seeing anything anymore. Seconds later, his eyes rolled back, and he fainted, going completely limp against the bed. Then, Kanto, they weren't in the same forest anymore. They weren't even in Sinnoh anymore. Ash staggered, suddenly standing on his own without Brock there to support him, and looked around blankly. He took a step and almost fell, before someone grabbed him around the chest and hoisted him up. Easy, Ash, Kid said quietly. She lowered him down, and Ash sat on the familiar, living, breathing floor of the Tree of Beginning and felt a dire sense of dread in his heart. There was debris everywhere. Remnants of Hunter Jay's attack just days before, and a soft, constant wail of pain could be heard from all around them. What's happening? Ash asked, throat constricting around the words. Where are Brock and May and Max? Kid shook her head slowly. Somewhere safe, I hope. Pikachu jumped on Ash's lap, and he patted gently, and then lifted his head and saw Lucario. It kneeled by Sir Aaron's time flower, its expression serious and eyes far away. Next to it lay Mew, limp and faded and weak. The tree wailed around them, dying along with its soul, and a sense of déjà vu hit Ash with the force of a gigavolt havoc. No, he whispered, but he was too dazed to even get up to his knees. Lucario. Pikachu whimpered, and its nails curled into the fabric of his pants, and Kid put her hand on his shoulder, not roughly, but firmly enough to halt any movement he might attempt. It's Lucario's decision, she said softly. No, Ash said again. They were right back where it had started. Back where Lucario had died, all those years ago. Back where Ash had just days ago been given a second chance. And he had naively thought, oh, how stupid he'd been, stupid, stupid, stupid. I failed, he said, hollow in his realization. I failed them. Mew had done the impossible, made him travel through time to stop this from happening. But here they were again. Mew was dying, again, and so was Lucario. And this time, only one of them could live. Mew spent the last of its energy teleporting us away, to here, from that battle, Kid said. It chose this place for a reason, I'm sure. To set things back on track. I think, this is how it was meant to be. Ash shook his head numbly. No way. No way, all that happened and nothing's even gotten any better. We dunno if all the bad guys got arrested and Mewtwo is still missing, maybe captured, and Mew and the tree are about to die again. There's no way this was what I was supposed to do here. Ash was trembling when he paused to catch his breath. Kid crouched next to him, hand still on his shoulder. Ash. It can't be, Ash said, and wiped tears of frustration away from his eyes. I missed something. I should have done something different or been better somehow. I should have. Kid squeezed his shoulder and Ash stopped talking, focusing on drawing a deeper breath. Lucario had pulled Mew onto its lap, and it held its head gently between its paws, swirls of powerful healing aura surrounding them both. Ash watched, numb fingers buried in Pikachu's fur, as the life force drained and drained and drained from Lucario, streaming into Mew. The tree sang, and Ash could feel its gentle warmth building under him into something stronger. This ancient tree of Kanto was a protector of the many towns and forests that surrounded it. It was an essential part of what made his home region thrive and flourish. It was absolutely necessary that it survived, and that meant that Mew needed to survive. It is all right, Ash, Lucario hummed. It sounded hollow and faded, even in telepathy. It will be all right. Let me help, Ash said, eyes wide, hands grasping and nails scraping against the ground as he shook Kid off and struggled to crawl towards Lucario and Mew. Maybe we can, maybe neither of us has to. No, that would not work, Lucario said softly. Your aura is fraying. It is barely able to hold your physical form together. But Ash, do not fret. Once I heal Mew, it will do the rest. I assure that everything will turn out all right. It closed its eyes, allowing the last reserves of its energy to flow freely. The aura is with me, like it was with Aaron. And Ash watched, on his hands and knees, trembling like a leaf in the winds of fall, as Lucario started glowing brighter and brighter, in that familiar luminous blue, before all of it transferred into Mew, surrounding it all over. Lucario grunted in pain, cracks like static wrecking its body. "Thank you, Ash," it whispered. "Thank you for being so kind to me, and showing me how truly beautiful and wondrous the world has become. But I do not belong here, in this time, not like you do." It groaned, struggling to stay upright as the painful shocks shot through it. Its form was now completely see-through, faintly glowing. "Hang on, Lucario," Ash begged, reaching for its hand. "Don't leave us. I think it is time for me to see my greatest friend once again." Ash barely had the strength to wipe the tears away from his eyes. "Lucario." Lucario looked up at him, a soft look in its eyes, like a smile. I have to go, Ash. Aaron is waiting for me." It faded completely then, forming a circle of light, expanding, and casting the entire cavern in its glow. Mew rose along with it, its eyes opening and head turning as it stared right at Ash. And now, it spoke. "You know," Ash blinked, and he was somewhere else. In his room, back in Pallet Town, sitting on the well-worn, Pokemon-patterned blankets of his own childhood bed. Startled, he sat back, looking around in confusion. "What?" "Don't be afraid, Ash Ketchum." Ash whipped his head around and spotted Mew, hovering inches off the shelf where he kept all his medals and trophies. His mouth opened and closed a couple of times before he spoke. "Mew?" "I see you're confused," Mew said, and there was a glint of mirth in its eyes. "Luckily, I knew you would be, and that is why I conjured this room around us, to make you feel more comfortable. I do hope it was of help." Ash drew a shaky breath, head still spinning from everything that had just happened with Lucario and now being in this space with Mew. He tried to wipe away the tears he knew still streaked his face, but his cheeks were completely dry under his trembling fingers. "You conjured, what's going on? Where are we, then, really?" Mew's long tail whipped gently from side to side. "In a small pocket of time and space, made just for us, so we may have a moment to speak." "Speak?" Ash asked. "Why, you are deserving of an explanation what has happened to you over this recent passage of time. Of how and why you were brought back into your own past, and how you shall now go on with your future." Ash pressed his palms against the covers on his bed. The surface was smooth, almost silky, even though he knew how scratchy these particular sheets were in reality. The realization made his breath catch, and he suddenly missed home more than he'd ever had during his many travels. "Sure," he muttered, through the painful lump in his throat, "I'd like to know." Mew hummed, and it floated closer to the floor, the tips of its toes brushing against the carpet. "Something happened that has never happened before. Each of the creation trio, Dialga, Palkia and Giratina, were warned in a vision of a terrible fate that was about to befall over the region of Sinnoh, and other regions as well, in the near future. It would all start with the capture of a Mew, and only get worse from there. Eventually, a human would be able to harness the full power of both Mew and Mewtwo, and she would rise to rule over the entire region and beyond. With the power of those two Pokemon, she would then go against the creation trio themselves, and that battle would be devastating for the world itself." Mew sighed, floating closer to Ash's legs. Ash stared at it, trying to comprehend all that he just heard. "It had to be prevented," Mew continued. "There wasn't much time. They didn't know if there would be anything strong enough to stop that future from transpiring. As you probably guessed, it was my imminent capture that would begin this string of events. And the closest guardian we had to that starting point was you, Ash." Ash swallowed, hands curling into fists. "Guardian? A creature with strong enough soul, and a steady enough heart to go against all odds and stop these events from happening." "But," Ash choked out. "I'm not." "You were strong, back then," Mew interrupted, "when you traveled with your friends from Sinnoh. But not steady enough. So, I reached through the void of time and pulled forward your current self. Just a temporary switch, for just long enough for you to push those dark events off their course and towards a brighter future." Ash gnawed on his lip, though there was no pain he could feel. "So," he muttered, "it was never about saving Lucario. It was going to die, no matter what." Mew shook its head slowly. It was never about anything particular. The only thing we were hoping you would be able to do was to stop that hunter from gaining all the power she was about to gain from having both me and my child in her control. And, Ash Ketchum, you did the impossible. You succeeded. Ash frowned, leaning his elbows against his knees. She's still created Mewtwo. She was still able to do that. That doesn't matter, Mew replied. As we just left them, the hunter is weak, and her operation has been all but destroyed. Mewtwo is an unruly captive, and it will take her years to rebuild and even begin to bend it to her will. You will see, once you get back to your own time, that in the end her efforts amounted next to nothing. Ash was too exhausted to feel any real relief hearing that. I'm glad, I guess, he said quietly. I just hope everyone is all right, and that Lucario. He closed his eyes, feeling the familiar prickle of tears behind his eyelids. He was trembling slightly, tired, and dismayed and sorrowful. Why's my memory different? He asked then. Why'd I remember Lucario dying in a different way in my past? You are now switching back to your own body and time, Mew explained. Meanwhile, your younger mind is traveling back, but it is not advised for a human to know too much about their own future. That is why I will mix and meddle with your and your companion's memories, so the events that happened between the 2 different days at the Tree of Beginning will be forgotten, and you will all wake up thinking they were just continuation of the same event. Your younger self will forget his time in Alola, and your friends will forget everything they experienced during these past 3 days in Sinnoh with you. So, Ash mumbled, his head hurting from trying to take in all the new information. All of this had already happened while I was in Alola with Professor Kukui, and I just didn't remember it. I had already been to Alola before? Brock and the others had gone through all of this? He stared at the floor blankly. I guess that explains why all of our memories from the tree and the following days were so blurry. Yes, the merged memories won't turn out perfect. You and your companions might be able to recall some things in time, but that, unfortunately, cannot be prevented. The most important thing is that for now, you are able to continue on with your journey as normal, and eventually end up at the point where you were when I pulled you back in time. Ash buried his head in his hands. Oh man, Mew, that's a lot to take in. Breathing unsteadily, he squeezed his eyes shut against the rush of emotions. I will heal your physical body, Mew continued. Replenish your aura and fill your immediate needs, but any other struggles you might face following this experience, those you'll have to find your own way through. Ash nodded into his hands. Mew took pity in him, placing a gentle paw on his knee. Rest now, child. You have done a great service to the world, and the world shall be eternally grateful to you. There was an intense feeling of vertigo, of the world giving out under his feet, and when Ash next opened his eyes, he was laying on a different bed, and Professor Kukui was gazing down at him with concern. Almost immediately after Ash fainted, he was already blinking back awake, staring up at Kukui with wide eyes like they had never seen each other before. Ash? Kukui asked carefully. Maybe these bouts of weakness and confusion were still aftereffects from the blast. How are? Ash suddenly pushed up onto his hands and scooted back, until he was flat against the fall, breathing hard with his knees pulled in front of him protectively. He kept staring at Kukui, though his eyes flickered around the room quickly, taking in Pikachu sleeping at the foot of the bed and the rest of his Pokémon milling about the room. Professor Kukui? He asked hoarsely. He coughed, winced, and drew his hands closer to his face, observing them intently, turning them around and inspecting the little scars and scratches on them. Kukui forced himself to sit back, relax his shoulders and speak calmly. Yes, Ash. It's me. Ash looked up again, and this time Kukui could clearly see there was something different about him. Something like, I'm back, Ash breathed, and then he smiled, wide and bright and so familiar, I'm back. Pikachu's ears twitched, and in seconds it was up and jumping over Ash, squealing in excitement. Pikachu? Ash laughed, just a bit hysterically, as the Pokémon licked all over his face and hands. I missed you, buddy. Kukui could only stare. You're grinning. Ash pushed Pikachu away and leapt forward, wrapping his arms around Kukui's shoulders. Professor, he mumbled into the crook of his neck. Missed you too. Kukui instantly teared up in relief. He hugged Ash back, trying to steady his hiccuping breathing as he held his dearest student. Do you mean, he murmured, that everything is back to normal? you are now back to your own time? Ash nodded wordlessly against his shoulder. Judging by the wetness Kukui could feel there, Ash had started to cry silently. Oh, man? He mumbled after a minute, still not pulling back. Pikachu crawled between them, and Ash took a deep, shaky breath. His shoulders were trembling minutely. It's okay, Kukui said quietly, brushing a hand down his back. You're okay. Ash said nothing. And Kukui held him tighter. They were in no hurry. They could take this little moment to themselves. That was, until Burnett, followed by Nurse Joy, burst back into the room in a panicked frenzy. Once everyone had calmed down, Ash demanded to know all about everything. Why he was in the hospital wing, why Kukui had bandages around his hands, what had his younger self done and said, had he done something stupid, what happened with Miriam. Kukui was out of breath explaining all of it to Ash, who absorbed everything with little comment, just nodding and smiling softly in that knowing, relieved way of his. He asked about Mewtwo, and Lance, and Tobias, and someone called Kellen. He asked about Brock and May and Max and if Kukui had heard anything from someone called Kid Summers. At some point, Kukui had to stop him. Laughing breathlessly, he grabbed Ash's shoulders and gently but firmly pressed him back against the mattress. Let's continue in the morning, all right? He suggested. He still couldn't tame the grin that had lingered on his lips for the past hour or so. We still have much to discuss, but we both need rest, you especially. We haven't even begun to talk about what happened to you while you were gone. Ash's smile fell considerably at that. He eyed Kukui, yawning into his palm. I guess so, he muttered reluctantly. Well, good night, Professor. It was almost comical how eager Ash was suddenly to drop the subject. If Kukui didn't know what that entailed. It certainly hadn't been an easy couple of days for his Ash, either. Still, he kept smiling reassuringly. Sleep well, Ash. The next morning, after the kids had had a chance to visit Ash, Kukui returned to Ash's bedside with Lance and Tobias in tow. Ash was sitting up, playing with and caring for his Pokémon and looking almost completely recovered already. The slight fever he'd sported had broken during the night, and Nurse Joy was confident he could be released after his midday checkup later that day. Hello, Ash, Tobias said. How's it going, Ash? Lance greeted as they walked into the room. Ash grinned, clearly happy to see them. Hi Tobias, and hi Lance, nice to see you again, he said, before pausing. Wait, how long's it been even? 'Cause I was with you and Kellen and the others like yesterday. Lance chuckled. Been a lot longer for me, for sure. But hey, look at you. Glad to see you've recovered well after that scare you gave us. Ash waved his hand vaguely. Well, I don't really know what happened to me here with Mewtwo and all. But now that Professor Kukui told me what happened, I think I'm starting to also remember bits of it, and Mew told me that the way it messed up with our memories wouldn't be perfect or anything. I sure hope I'll remember everything I did at some point. Kukui sat on the edge of his bed, and Pikachu crawled onto his lap, crooning softly. Lance and Tobias took seats next to the bed, and Lance exclaimed, So it was Mew. I thought it might have been that sneaky cat. Though we have theorized that Mewtwo did its fair share of memory wiping under Miriam's orders as well. Ash gnawed on his lip. What's gonna happen to her? He asked. Miriam, I mean. Lance shared a heavy look with Tobias. Life in prison, most likely. She is considered extremely dangerous by all standards, including but not limited to hunting and experimenting with legendaries, the creation of Mewtwo, and the variety of other shady businesses she was involved in. My sister needs time to think long and hard about what she's done, Tobias murmured. He sighed dourly. I'm sorry, Ash. I wish I had acted sooner. Maybe some of this could have been prevented. Maybe, Ash agreed. But it turned out all right in the end, right? I think. He smiled lopsidedly, looking like he just thought up a private joke. I think it could have turned out much worse, too. Lance nodded. You're most certainly right. Team Enigma wasn't even the only black market organization you helped to take down that night. We also caught a man called Dirk Simmons, also known as Pokemon Hunter D, an aspiring Pokemon trader, and were able to go rescue dozens of wild Pokemon from the warehouse he worked at. Kukui raised his brow. Ash remained tight-lipped, so Lance continued, It's quite of a funny story, actually. The day after the Enigma raid, we found out we also had him in custody, but no one could remember why we had him. We knew he wasn't an Enigma grunt, but we nor him had any idea why he'd been at the scene that night. Luckily, he gave up enough information that we were able to track down his base of operation. From there we found plenty of evidence of illegal activity to convict him of illicit hunt and trade straight away. I have gained back a large amount of my memories from those days, but not all of the details, Tobias added. We were going over these events with Lance recently and I suddenly remembered Dirk attacking the Pokemon Center with someone else. He and his partner sold you to Team Enigma, didn't they? To gain access to Mew? Eyes widening at the edges, Ash glanced at Kukui, who stared back feeling disturbed by the new information. Avoiding his gaze, Ash nodded quickly. Something like that, I guess. He was with Hunter J, and they were trying to catch Mew, but their plans got messed up by, me. Hunter J. Lance yelped. Wait, really? I thought she only worked alone. By this point, Kukui had totally lost the thread of the conversation. Ash shrugged. He worked for her, but I guess it was only for a short while. She left him the second she realized he was about to get caught. Right. That sounds more like her, Lance snorted. Too bad we can't confront her about it, since she went missing years ago, whilst working for Team Galactic in Sinnoh. He gave a pointed look to Ash which Kukui didn't particularly like. Ash stared back and kept a straight face, but at this point Kukui knew it didn't really mean anything. Lance huffed in amusement and stood up. Well, thanks for the info, Ash. I think that's enough of us interrogating you for now. Rest up, won't you? Ash smiled cheekily. Yeah. Tobias stood up as well. Congrats on the league victory, by the way. He said. Your battle skills have definitely improved from the last time we battled during the Lily of the Valley conference. We should have a rematch sometime soon. Ash let out a startled laugh. Yeah, for sure. He grinned. Tobias pressed his lips together, hiding a smile himself, and followed Lance out of the room. Later that day, Kukui found Ash sitting by the edge of the outer deck with Pikachu, watching the ocean while fiddling with his Z-ring absent-mindedly. Kukui wandered over and sat down next to him, and Ash simply smiled at him sideways before looking back into the horizon. His eyes were red-rimmed, like he'd been crying, but he seemed to have settled down. How are you doing? Kukui asked softly. He felt slight worry when Ash shrugged but didn't answer anything else. Kukui hummed. It's been a bit much, hasn't it? Ash nodded. He seemed to mull over something for a minute, and Kukui waited patiently. A lot happened while I was in the past, Ash eventually said. He sounded calm, but Kukui could hear a slight tremor in his voice. It's just a lot to think about. Kukui let out a breath. I'm sure it is. Just know I'm here if you need to get anything out of your chest. Ash lowered his head. Pikachu pushed its head against Ash's hand, and Ash scratched it behind its ears until Pikachu squealed in joy. Ash was still looking down when he said, I never told you about Lucario, did I? Kukui, surprised, shook his head. No, but I know about it now, obviously. Your younger self was very worried about it. Ash grimaced slightly. Right. I probably didn't know what happened to it. He looked up at Kukui sharply. Did I know? That it had died? Kukui's heart lurched painfully. So it was true. Ash had seen Lucario die. Not for certain, Kukui told him gently. There was a moment, after you just tried a Z move, when you suddenly seemed to get a feeling that something bad had happened to it. Afterwards, you told me how you and Lucario had worked hard to save Mew, nearly dying in the process yourself. Ash nodded, lips pressed together tightly. I had a really strong connection with Lucario, he said after a moment. It taught me a lot about me and my aura. It sounded like a great friend, Kukui murmured, and Ash gave him a thin, grateful smile. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, Ash took a deeper breath. I failed that Z move, didn't I? He asked. The one you mentioned? Kukui looked at him amazed. You remember that? Ash nodded hesitantly. It's weird. Kinda like remembering parts of an old dream or something. It's like, he indicated with his hands vaguely, you know that feeling when you're not sure if something really happened to you, or if it was just a really vivid dream. Kukui hummed in agreement. Oh, yes. And when you try to think harder about it, the memories just keep slipping further away. Yeah. Ash pursed his lips with an annoyed look on his face. Mew really messed with my head that day. Now I have two different memories of Lucario dying. His voice cracked at the last words. He sighed, and Kukui's heart broke for him. I'm sorry, Ash. That must be hard. Ash shrugged slightly, eyes downcast. I mean, I've lived with its death for a long time already. I dunno why it hit so hard seeing it all over again. I only knew it for a few days anyways, and I know it's gonna be happy to be with its friend Aaron again. I guess it was just. He quickly rubbed his eyes, turning away slightly so Kukui lost sight of his face. Sorry. Kukui leaned his elbows against his knees and squinted into the far ocean. Breathed in the salty winds. Nothing to apologize for. You should take all the time you need to process it. Ash nodded, and a peaceful silence fell over them again. After a long while, Ash broke it. Who's Manu, anyway? And Kukui buried his face into his hands, groaning long and deep. Fucking Manu. Then, Kanto Ash woke up to Pikachu nudging his face, feeling totally disoriented. He realized quickly he was still inside the main chamber of the Tree of Beginning. He must have passed out soon after Lucario's sacrifice. Kid Summers was sitting up next to him, patting down her clothes in mild confusion. How? What? Ash stood up carefully, looking down at himself. Something felt off, but he couldn't really place what. The biggest thing on his mind was Lucario's death, and it ached in his very soul to remember what had happened to it. How it had only gotten a short moment to stay in this time, before sacrificing itself for the life of Mew and the tree. Ash had been able to see a lot of himself in Lucario, and they had only just met. He would miss it greatly. Mew floated down from the ceiling, a curious look in its bright eyes. Mew. It crooned. Hi, Mew? Ash greeted it softly. Is everything okay with the tree and everything now? What about my friends? Mew nodded emphatically. It floated towards an entrance that led out of the chamber and onto one of the outside ledges of the tree. This way? Ash asked. Pikachu hopped onto his shoulder, and he and Kid followed Mew outside. They had to blink to adjust to the bright daylight, but once they got used to it, the view that opened around them was brilliant. For a moment they just stood there, taking it all in. And then, turning around, Ash spotted 3 familiar figures standing uphill, looking back at him in confusion. Ash took off running, waving at them in relieved joy. Hey, we're here, it's Ash, May exclaimed. They're okay, cheered Max, and soon after they sprinted down the hill to meet them halfway. Thank gods you're all right, May said, looking Ash up and down. We just woke up on the floor over there and none of us have any idea what just happened. Max looked around, a frown forming on his face. Wait, where's Lucario? His heart twisting in his chest, Ash looked down for a moment. Lucario, he took a deep breath. Lucario's last words played over in his head. I have to go, Ash. Aaron is waiting for me. Ash looked up, into the luminous blue sky. Breathed in the fresh air and felt the aura that lived in every nook and cranny of the wondrous tree. It was painful, but still, he smiled. Lucario left to go be with a friend. Brock inhaled sharply. You mean? Oh Ash, May whispered. I wish there was something we could have done to help it. If Ash had been stronger, he could have stopped Lucario from taking over and giving its all to save Mew. If Ash'd been stronger, maybe he could have been able to save them both. He said nothing. Maybe it's for the best, Brock said quietly. But, it's hard to believe Lucario is really gone. No, Lucario isn't gone, Ash thought. He pressed his hand to his chest, where he could feel that familiar warmth, that strange, intense feeling he'd gotten more aware of after meeting Lucario. He looked up, determined. Its aura is with me. That evening, when they had said goodbye to Kid and Queen Eileen, collected the rest of their belongings from the Cameron Palace, and were walking along the long bridge away from the castle, Ash suddenly stopped, unable to take another step. Brock, May and Max walked ahead for a bit before stopping as well, looking back at him in concern. What is it, Ash? Brock asked. Pikachu hopped off his backpack and onto the stone railing, looking up at him with a tilted head. Ash sighed, shaking his head. I dunno, I've got a weird feeling about all that happened, like I've forgotten something really important. Like what? May asked. Ash shrugged. He felt fine, physically, maybe even more so than he'd expected after all that had happened at the tree. The thing that weirded him out the most was that he was wearing his spare set of clothes, with his other set completely missing, and none of them, not even Brock, had been able to remember when he'd ruined his other clothes so completely that they had needed to be thrown away. They all were missing large chunks of time as well. Queen Eileen said they had been gone for days, but none of them could remember half of what had happened. Kid had suggested that perhaps Mew had something to do with that. Maybe it and the tree had kept them unconscious while it repaired itself so they would be safe to leave afterwards, and it did make a lot of sense. Apparently, Mew were some of the most mysterious creatures ever encountered in the Pokemon world. I dunno, Ash admitted. It's just been a weird day. Brock chuckled. I mean, that's nothing new. I think we've had weirder, May agreed. Definitely, said Max, and all their deadpan looks made Ash burst out laughing, worries mostly forgotten. I wonder if we're gonna see Mew again, he mused after a moment. There was something strange about it. About the way it had looked at Ash after he'd woken up. I hope so, Max said cheerily. It was awesome. Ash stared over the lake, frowning before shaking his head sharply. Yeah, he said, lifting his head. Focusing. What happened was in the past. There was lots to do and lots to see, and the only way to get there was forward. It was awesome, he agreed, more certain now. Lucario was awesome too. Lucario might be physically gone, Brock said gently. But its spirit lives with you, Ash. You still have the chance to show it the world and all the adventures that are waiting for us. Gazing over the endless forests of the Kanto region, thinking about all the things he wanted to do next, Ash couldn't help the familiar excitement bubbling inside him. Right, well, he told the others. There's still lots to do in Hoenn. Let's start heading back there. Lucario had done what it thought was right, no matter the consequences, and that was a lesson Ash would carry with him for the rest of his life. Now, Alola the following day Kukui, Burnett and the students took a boat back to Mele Mele Island. Kahuna Hala was waiting for them at the docks, greeting Kukui with a hefty pat on his shoulder. Welcome back, he said with his booming voice. He smiled after Ash, who looked so incredibly happy to be back on the island, running ahead with his Pokemon in tow. Don't run too far, kid, Hala called after him, making Ash turn on his heels. I have some visitors waiting for you. Not Manu, right? Kukui asked with more terror in his voice than was probably reasonable. He just really didn't want to deal with Manu right then. Hala laughed loudly. No, not Manu. Come on. He beckoned with his hand and started leading the group up the hill and towards the Pokemon school. I wonder who's there, Lana said to Ash as they trekked ahead of the group, always being the most curious ones out of all of them. Do you know? Ash shook his head. No idea. Hala chuckled. I got a list from Champion Lands of people you might want to see, Ash. Let's see if I got everyone right. Kukui could see the wonder on Ash's face as he turned to stare up at Hala. A list? Wait. He grinned from ear to ear. No way. Is it Brock and May and Max? Who else? Hala made a gesture like he was zipping up his lips. You'll see soon enough. After that, Ash took off half running, and Kukui had to stride in double speed to keep up with him. As they arrived at the edge of the schoolyard, there was a surprised shout of, "He's here," and then a small group of cheerful people were rushing towards them to greet Ash. Kukui only recognized Brock, but there was also a girl around the same age as Ash, and her younger brother, so May and Max. Next to them were a young man in ranger clothes, Kellen, maybe, and a woman in casual clothes that looked deceptively much like a Nurse Joy. It really was you, the ranger exclaimed, pulling Ash into a sideways hug under his arm. You are the reason Sinnoh is free of that damned Team Enigma. Oh, my God. The events of that week have haunted me for years. I never could remember all the details from it. He nudged the woman by his side. And Abby even less, we found out. The woman, Abby, nodded shortly. I'm sorry to tell you I don't remember much about you at all, Ash. But Kellen has talked my ear off about you, so I'd love to get to know you for real this time. Ash laughed at that. For sure, nice to meet you, Abigail. This is messed up, Max complained. You have memories that we don't. I was told I was kidnapped back then, but I can't remember even that. May grimaced, hitting him on the shoulder. It's a good thing you don't remember that, and I'd like to not be reminded of it either, thank you very much. Max made a face at her but changed the subject. Anyway, this is the Pokemon school, right? Man, it's so big. Ash grinned brightly. Yeah, I've had a great time here, and Professor Kukui is the best teacher you could ask for." Taken aback by the sudden compliment, Kukui rubbed his neck awkwardly. "Oh, well, thanks Ash. I think I want to go to a Pokemon school next year," Max decided, and May rolled her eyes. "Well, I think it's not yet your decision to make, lil bro." While Max blew raspberries at his sister, Kukui took a step back and just observed everyone for a moment, absorbing all the good energy and the laughs and the cheerful chatter around him. Burnett sneaked her way next to him, wrapping her arm around his. Kukui smiled down at her, and Burnett leaned her head against his shoulder, sighing contently. They watched as Ash burst into a full-body laughter at something Kellen had said. "We're gonna be okay," Burnett said quietly, "aren't we?" Kukui nodded against the crown of her head, and then something caught his eye. Turning his head, he inspected the yard and the tree line, but there was nothing unusual. Burnett tugged on his arm, and Kukui turned back, a warm feeling spreading in his chest. He could have sworn that he saw, from the corner of his eye, the shape of Mewtwo watching over them. "Yeah," he whispered. "We're gonna be okay." The end. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please let me know your thoughts and reviews in the comment box. Now I will see you in the next video.